The call came through at 11:15 on a Thursday night, which should have been my first warning sign. In 15 years of hauling oversized loads across the Pacific Northwest, I'd learned that last-minute route changes rarely meant good news. I was sitting in my rig at a fuel stop outside Wenatchee, going over my logs for the next day's haul, when my phone buzzed with the dispatcher's number. "Lane Rochford," I answered, already reaching for a pen. "Lane, it's dispatch. We've got a route modification for your morning run." The voice belonged to someone I didn't recognize, which was unusual. Our company wasn't large enough that I didn't know most of the office staff by voice. "What kind of modification?" "State Route 47 through the Cascade Pass. You're authorized for the closed section, milepost 118 through 146. I set down my pen and stared at the phone. Route 47 had been shut down since February for emergency repairs after a mudslide took out a good chunk of the roadbed. It was now late September, and every trucker I knew avoided that corridor entirely. The detour added 2 hours, but nobody complained. Better 2 hours than driving on compromised infrastructure. "That road's been closed for 7 months, I said carefully. "I didn't hear anything about it reopening." "It hasn't, not officially. But your load needs to go through tonight. We've got special authorization from the DOT. You'll have a pilot car escort, full clearance. The paperwork's already filed." Something about this felt wrong in a way I couldn't immediately articulate. The load itself wasn't unusual. I was hauling prefabricated bridge components, heavy steel sections that required oversized permits, and careful route planning. The destination was a construction site up near the Canadian border. Standard industrial freight, nothing exotic or time-sensitive enough to justify using a closed highway. "Why the rush?" I asked. "This delivery isn't scheduled until Monday. We've got 3 days. There was a pause on the other end, long enough that I thought the connection had dropped. "Lane, the authorization is only good for tonight. If we don't move it now, we lose the window and the whole project gets delayed by weeks. The client's already threatening penalties. I need to know if you're taking this run or if I need to find another driver." The implied threat was clear enough. Turn down a high-priority run and you might find yourself getting fewer calls. I'd built a reputation as someone who delivered on time, in any weather, on any road. That reputation kept me working when other drivers sat idle. "What about the pilot car?" I asked. "Who's running escort?" "Brenna Salvo. She's already at the staging area near the closure barriers. You'll meet her there at 0200 hours. I knew Brenna by reputation. She ran one of the better escort services in the region, professional and competent. If she'd agreed to this run, it couldn't be completely insane. "All right," I said finally. "Send me the route details and the authorization codes. I'll need to see the paperwork before I roll. It's already in your email. Check in when you reach the staging area." The line went dead before I could respond. I pulled up my laptop and opened the email. The authorization looked legitimate enough, complete with DOT signatures and permit numbers. The route took us through 28 miles of officially closed highway, entering at the eastern barrier and exiting at the western checkpoint. Estimated transit time was 90 minutes, assuming normal speeds for heavy loads on mountain grades. What struck me as I studied the documents was how thoroughly planned this was. Someone had gone to considerable effort to arrange clearance through a closed corridor on short notice. The level of bureaucratic coordination involved suggested this wasn't a sudden emergency, despite what dispatch had implied. I spent the next 2 hours running through my pre-trip inspection with extra care. If I was going to drive a closed highway in the middle of the night, I wanted every system on my rig functioning perfectly. The trailer lights, the brake lines, the tire pressure, the load securement. Everything checked out. The bridge components were strapped down with enough redundancy to survive an earthquake. At 1:30 in the morning, I pulled out of the fuel stop and headed west toward the mountains. The roads were nearly empty at this hour, just the occasional long-haul trucker passing in the opposite direction and the rare insomniac in a passenger car. The September night had that particular clarity that comes just before autumn fully settles in. Cool and sharp, with stars visible even through the light pollution from the scattered towns. The staging area was exactly where the email had indicated, a gravel turnout about a quarter-mile from the official closure barriers. A white SUV with a light bar mounted on the roof was already parked there, its hazard lights pulsing in the darkness. I pulled in behind it and killed my engine. The driver's door of the SUV opened and a woman climbed out. She was maybe 40, wearing a reflective vest over a canvas jacket, and she moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this work for years. She walked back to my truck and I rolled down the window. "Lane Rochford?" she asked. "That's me. You must be Brenna." "Brenna Salvo, yeah." She handed me a clipboard with additional paperwork. "I need you to sign off that you've been briefed on the route conditions and understand this is a special authorization run." I scanned the document. It was mostly liability waivers and acknowledgement of the non-standard nature of the haul. I signed where indicated and handed it back. "Have you driven this route before?" I asked. "Before the closure, I mean." "Twice. Both times in daylight with normal traffic. This'll be my first time through the closed section." She paused, looking up at the dark mountains ahead. "DOT says the road's structurally sound. They just haven't finished the final resurfacing work. Why close it at all if it's sound?" She shrugged. "Bureaucracy, probably. Easier to close the whole section while they finish the project than deal with traffic control and reduced speeds." It made sense, in a tedious governmental sort of way, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something about this run was off. "You get these kinds of jobs often?" I asked. "Middle of the night runs on closed roads." "First time," Brenna admitted. "But the money's good and the paperwork checks out. Sometimes weird is just weird, you know? Not everything has to make sense." She had a point. I'd hauled enough unusual loads on enough odd schedules to know that logistics sometimes created strange situations. This might just be one of those bureaucratic accidents where the only way to resolve a scheduling conflict was to authorize something technically legal but practically bizarre. "All right," I said. "What's the protocol?" "I lead, you follow at a 100-yard interval. We maintain radio contact on Channel 12. There are 2 checkpoints along the route where we'll stop for visual confirmation that we're Asia authorized. The barriers are manned even though the road's closed." "Who's manning them at 2 in the morning?" "DOT contract workers, according to the briefing. They're expecting us." Brenna returned to her SUV and I watched as she approached the first barrier. It was a standard highway closure setup. Concrete barriers arranged to block both lanes with a narrow gap on the shoulder that could be opened for authorized vehicles. As I watched, a figure in a reflective vest emerged from a small trailer parked beside the barriers. There was a brief conversation, some paperwork exchanged, and then the worker moved one of the barriers aside. Brenna's SUV rolled through the gap and I followed, keeping the prescribed distance. In my mirrors, I watched the worker replace the barrier behind us. Just like that, we were on a road that officially didn't exist for civilian traffic. The highway looked normal enough in my headlights. The pavement was smooth, recently resurfaced from what I could see. The center line and edge markings were fresh and bright. If this was an unfinished construction zone, it showed no obvious signs of incompletion. We climbed steadily into the mountains, following the curves that I vaguely remembered from years past when this had been an active route. The grade wasn't severe, maybe 6% at the steepest sections, easily manageable with my load. Brenna's SUV maintained a steady pace ahead, its taillights a constant reference point in the darkness. At mile marker 122, my CB radio crackled to life. "How's it looking back there?" Brenna's voice came through clearly. I keyed the mic. "Smooth so far. Road surface is better than half the highways I drive regularly." "Yeah, I'm not sure what they've been doing for 7 months, but it wasn't repairing the pavement. This is pristine." We continued in silence for another few miles. The night pressed in around us, thick and complete in the way it only gets in the mountains when you're far from any town. My headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, illuminating the white lines and the occasional reflector post. But beyond that immediate circle of light, there was nothing. No other vehicles, no lights from distant buildings, nothing but the black shapes of trees and the darker mass of the mountains rising on either side. At mile marker 127, I noticed something that made me frown. A green highway sign indicating a rest area in 2 miles. I didn't remember a rest area on this stretch of Route 47, and my maps didn't show one. I made a mental note to ask Brenna about it at the next checkpoint. 2 miles later, the promised rest area appeared on the right. It was a standard layout. A small parking loop, some picnic tables, and a concrete building that probably housed restrooms. What was strange was that the facility looked maintained. The parking lot was clear of debris, the grass was cut, and there was even a security light illuminating the entrance. Brenna's SUV continued past without slowing, so I did the same. But the image stuck with me. A maintained rest area on a closed highway that had supposedly been out of service for 7 months. The CB crackled again. "Did you see that rest area?" Brenna asked. "I saw it. Wasn't expecting it." "Neither was I. It's not on my route maps." We drove another 5 minutes before Brenna spoke again. "Lane, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." "All right. Does any of this feel normal to you?" I considered my response. The question itself was significant. It meant Brenna was experiencing the same vague unease that had been building in me since we entered the closed section. "Not particularly," I said finally, "but I can't point to anything specific that's wrong." "Same here. Perfect road, maintained facilities, but we're supposedly on a closed construction zone. And this is my 3rd escort run this week, and none of them have felt quite right." "What do you mean?" "Small things. Routes that don't match the paperwork. Checkpoints that aren't where they should be. Last Tuesday, I escorted a tanker truck through a section of highway that my GPS insisted didn't exist. Did you report it?" "To who? Everything's technically by the book. The authorizations are legitimate. The routes are legal. It's just that the details don't quite line up with reality." Before I could respond, we rounded a curve, and the first checkpoint came into view. This one was more elaborate than the entrance barrier, with portable lighting towers illuminating a wider section of road and multiple vehicles parked on the shoulder. As we approached, I could make out at least 3 figures in reflective clothing. Brenna's SUV slowed and pulled to a stop at the checkpoint. I brought my rig to a halt about 50 yards behind her, leaving room to maneuver if needed. Through my windshield, I watched one of the workers approach Brenna's vehicle, while the others remained near a white pickup truck with official-looking markings. The conversation seemed to go on longer than necessary for a simple verification stop. At one point, the worker pulled out what looked like a tablet or electronic device and spent several minutes consulting it while Brenna waited in her vehicle. Finally, the worker stepped back and waved Brenna forward. She drove slowly through the checkpoint and I followed, offering a nod to the workers as I passed. None of them acknowledged it. They simply watched my truck roll by with an intensity that felt less like professional attention and more like active scrutiny. Once we were clear of the checkpoint, Brenna's voice came over the CB again. "That was weird. What happened?" The guy checking my paperwork said something about confirming our slot, like we had an appointment or something. He asked if we were the 200 convoy. We're not a convoy, it's just you and me. That's what I told him. He just smiled and said, "For now," and waved me through. A chill ran down my back that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I glanced at my mirrors, half expecting to see headlights following us, but there was nothing behind me except darkness and the fading glow of the checkpoint lights. We continued climbing deeper into the mountains. The road curved more frequently now, following the contours of the terrain as it wound through a narrow valley. The trees closed in on both sides, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out even the starlight. At mile marker 133, something caught my attention. A small white sign at the side of the road, the kind used to mark distances or junctions, but this one displayed only a single word in black letters: "Keep." I frowned at it as it disappeared behind me. The word meant nothing in the context of a highway marker. It wasn't a town name, wasn't a warning, wasn't a distance indicator, just a single word on a sign that had no business existing. 3 minutes later, another identical sign appeared. "Keep." I keyed the CB. "Brenna, are you seeing these signs? The ones that just say keep?" "Yeah, I'm seeing them. They're not on my route notes." "What do you think they mean?" "No idea. Could be some kind of internal code for the construction crews." But even as she said it, I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. These weren't construction markers. They were too uniform, too deliberately placed. We encountered 3 more of the signs over the next 2 miles, always on the right side of the road, always displaying the same single word. The repetition felt deliberate, almost insistent. Then, at mile marker 138, the pattern changed. The next sign read, "Right." I felt my hands tighten on the steering wheel. "Keep right" was a common enough traffic instruction, but split across multiple signs and spaced miles apart, it took on an ominous quality. "Okay, that's officially creepy," Brenna said over the radio. "Lane, I'm not sure we should—" Her transmission cut off mid-sentence, replaced by a burst of static. I tried to respond but got only dead air. I watched her SUV ahead, expecting it to slow or signal some problem, but it maintained its steady pace. I reached for my CB mic again. "Brenna, if you can hear me, tap your brakes twice." No response. Her brake lights didn't flicker. I tried my cell phone, but there was no signal this deep in the mountains. The radio was our only link, and it had apparently failed. For the next 10 minutes, I followed Brenna's SUV in silence, watching for any sign that she was experiencing communication problems on her end. But her vehicle continued its steady progress, taking the curves with practiced ease, maintaining the prescribed interval between us. At mile marker 142, I spotted something that made my breath catch. Another vehicle ahead of Brenna. A semi-truck, its taillights barely visible in the distance, following the same route we were on. That shouldn't have been possible. We were supposedly the only authorized convoy on this closed highway. But there was definitely another truck ahead of us, and from what I could see, it was hauling a similar oversized load. I tried the CB again. Still nothing but static. The second checkpoint appeared without warning, a sudden pool of light around a sharp curve. This setup was different from the first, more temporary looking with fewer vehicles and only one figure visible in the illumination. Brenna slowed and stopped, and I did the same. The worker approached her vehicle, but from my position I couldn't see the interaction clearly. What I could see was the truck that had been ahead of us, now nowhere in sight. It should have been waiting at the checkpoint, or at least visible on the road beyond, but it had simply vanished. The worker waved Brenna through after only a brief exchange. As I pulled forward, he stepped into the middle of the lane, holding up one hand. I brought my rig to a complete stop and opened my window. The man was maybe 60, weathered in a way that suggested a lifetime of outdoor work. He wore a standard DOT contractor vest and carried a tablet similar to what I'd seen at the first checkpoint. But there was something off about his expression, a flatness that didn't match the professional courtesy I'd expect. "Lane Rochford?" he asked, his voice rough from years of cigarettes or mountain air. "That's me." He consulted his tablet, scrolling through something I couldn't see. "You're running late." I glanced at my dash clock. It showed 3:47 a.m. According to my calculations, we were actually ahead of schedule, having made better time than expected through the first section. "My clock says we're early," I offered. The man looked up from his tablet, and for just a moment, something moved behind his eyes that I couldn't interpret. Confusion, maybe, or recognition of something he didn't want to acknowledge. "Right," he said finally. "Must be a discrepancy in the system. You're cleared to proceed. Last section is 12 miles. You'll exit at the western barrier at milepost 146. What about the truck ahead of us?" His expression didn't change. "What truck?" "The semi that was ahead of my escort vehicle. I saw it before we reached this checkpoint. There's no other truck on this route tonight. Just you and your escort." He stepped aside and waved me forward. "Move along now. Don't want to miss your exit window." I wanted to press the issue, but something in his tone suggested the conversation was over. I rolled forward, watching him in my mirror as I passed. He stood in the middle of the road, tablet held loosely at his side, watching my truck disappear around the curve. Brenna's SUV was waiting just beyond the checkpoint. As soon as I caught up to her, the CB crackled back to life. "Lane, can you hear me? I've got you now. What happened back there?" "I don't know. The radio just died for a while." "Did you see that other truck?" So she had seen it too. That was simultaneously comforting and disturbing. "I saw it," I confirmed. The checkpoint worker claimed there was no other vehicle on this route. He told me the same thing. "Lane, I think we need to just get through this last section and get off this highway. Something's not adding up." I couldn't have agreed more. The final 12 miles felt longer than the entire previous section. The road continued to climb, the curves becoming tighter and more frequent. The forest pressed in close on both sides, and in my headlights I occasionally caught glimpses of reflective eyes watching from the tree line. Deer or elk, probably, but in my current state of mind, they felt like sentinels marking our passage. At mile marker 144, my CB crackled with something that wasn't Brenna's voice. It was barely audible under layers of static, but I could just make out a single word, repeated 3 times. "Right, right, right." Then silence. "Did you hear that?" I asked over the radio. "Hear what?" "Someone else on this channel, saying right. Lane, there's nobody else out here. We've been through this." But I knew what I'd heard, and I was increasingly certain that Brenna was wrong. We weren't alone on this highway. The western barrier appeared at exactly milepost 146, just as promised. The setup was identical to the eastern entrance, concrete barriers with a gap on the shoulder and a trailer for the workers. Brenna approached first, and I watched as a figure emerged to move the barrier aside. She pulled through and I followed, and just like that, we were back on a normal highway. The change was immediate and disorienting. Suddenly, there were reflective signs marking speed limits and upcoming junctions, chevron markers on the curves, and in the distance, the faint glow of a town's lights. Brenna pulled over onto the shoulder about a half-mile past the barrier, and I stopped behind her. She got out of her SUV and walked back to my truck. In the glow of my headlights, I could see she looked shaken. "Tell me honestly," she said as I climbed down from the cab. "Did that feel like a normal escort run to you? Not even close." She pulled out her phone and checked the time, then frowned. "Lane, what does your clock say?" I looked at my dash display. 4:15? Mine says 5:32. We're showing an hour and 15 minutes difference. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. That's not possible. We've been in radio contact most of the way. I know, but look. She held up her phone, showing the time. Then she pointed at my dashboard clock visible through the open door. The discrepancy was undeniable. We stood there in silence for a long moment, neither of us willing to voice what we were both thinking. Something about that closed highway, something about those signs and the mysterious truck and the workers who claimed we were running late had created an impossible situation. I'm putting all this in my report, Brenna said finally. The signs, the other vehicle, the time discrepancy, everything. You think anyone will believe it? She shrugged. Probably not, but it'll be on record. We exchanged contact information and agreed to compare notes after we'd both had some sleep. Brenna returned to her SUV and pulled away, her taillights disappearing down the highway toward whatever town she was heading to. I stood beside my truck for a few more minutes, looking back toward the closed section we'd just traversed. In the pre-dawn darkness, I couldn't see the barriers or the mountains beyond. Just a void where the highway disappeared into nothing. My phone had signal now, so I called dispatch to confirm my delivery schedule. The same unfamiliar voice answered. Lane Rochford, checking in. I'm through the Route 47 section and heading to the delivery site. Route 47? Your manifest shows you're on Route 5 Lane. Have been all night? I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it, then brought it back. I was authorized for the closed section of Route 47. You called me about it yesterday. I don't have any record of that call, and Route 47 has been closed since February. We wouldn't route a load through there. But I stopped myself. The person on the other end wouldn't understand. How could they when I didn't understand it myself? Never mind, I said. I'll be at the delivery site by noon. I ended the call before there could be any more confusion. As I climbed back into my cab and prepared to continue the drive, I noticed something on the passenger seat that hadn't been there before. A small, white sign, the same type I'd seen along the closed highway. It displayed a single word in black letters: keep. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It was real, solid, undeniably physical. Proof that what we'd experienced had actually happened, even if nobody would believe it. I set it on the dash where I could see it and pulled back onto the highway. The sun was starting to lighten the eastern sky, painting the mountains in shades of gray and pink. In the growing light, everything looked normal and rational and explicable. But I kept that sign, and I kept checking my mirrors for the rest of the drive, half expecting to see headlights that shouldn't exist, following a route that officially wasn't there. I made the delivery on schedule, though schedule felt like a meaningless word after what had happened on Route 47. The construction foreman signed off on the bridge components without comment, his crew already positioning the crane to offload the steel sections. Everything was routine, professional, exactly as it should be. Nobody mentioned anything unusual about the delivery route or timing. I should have felt relieved. The job was done, the cargo delivered intact, my responsibility completed. Instead, I felt a persistent unease that followed me as I drove the empty rig back toward Wenatchee. The white sign with "Keep" written on it sat on my dashboard where I'd left it. Every few minutes I found myself glancing at it, confirming it was still there. Physical evidence that something had happened, even if the logistics of it made no sense. I stopped for fuel at a truck plaza around noon, parking in the far section where the big rigs clustered together. As I filled the tanks, another driver approached from the next pump over. He was older than me, maybe 60, with the kind of weathered face that comes from decades behind the wheel. "That's a nice rig you got there," he said, nodding toward my Peterbilt. "Haul oversized loads?" "Mostly," I replied. "Industrial equipment, construction materials, that sort of thing." He gestured toward the sign on my dashboard, visible through the windshield. "Where'd you pick that up? Looks like DOT surplus." I hesitated, unsure how much to say. "Found it on a job. Thought it was interesting." He studied it for a moment longer, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You run Route 47 recently?" The question hit me like cold water. "Why do you ask?" "Because I've got one just like that in my cab. Picked it up 3 months ago after a night run through the closed section. Nobody believes me when I tell them about it, so I stopped trying." I felt my pulse quicken. "You ran the closed section? With authorization?" "That's what they told me. Special permit, pilot car escort, the whole setup. Road was perfect, no sign of any construction. But there were those signs, 'Keep right,' scattered all along the route." He paused, watching my reaction. "And a truck ahead of us that shouldn't have been there." "Did your escort see it too?" "She did. Woman named Brenna something. Professional operator, not the type to spook easily, but she was rattled by the end of it. Brenna had run this route before. Multiple times, she'd said, and she'd experienced the same anomalies each time." "What happened after?" I asked. "Did you report it?" The old driver shook his head. "Tried to. Dispatch had no record of authorizing the route. The DOT claimed they hadn't issued any special permits for that section. According to the official paperwork, I spent that night on Route 5, same as always." He tapped the fuel pump as it clicked off. "But I know what I saw, and I know what that road felt like. Wrong, somehow, like driving through a place that was only pretending to be a highway." He finished fueling and nodded a farewell before returning to his truck. I watched him drive away, then looked again at the sign on my dashboard. How many other drivers had been through that closed section? How many had their own unexplainable experiences that existed in the gap between what happened and what could be proven? I finished fueling and went inside to grab food and use the facilities. The truck plaza had the usual amenities: a diner, a small convenience store, showers, and a driver's lounge with worn furniture and a television playing the news on low volume. 3 other drivers occupied the lounge, nursing coffee and killing time between runs. I recognized one of them vaguely, probably had seen him at other stops along my regular routes. As I poured myself coffee from the communal pot, their conversation drifted over. "Heard they're opening Route 47 again next month," one was saying. "About time, that detour adds 2 hours. "They won't open it," another replied. "My brother works for the state transportation department. Says there's some kind of dispute about the repairs, environmental concerns or something. So why run convoys through it at night? I've heard at least 4 drivers mention getting called for special authorization runs in the past 6 months. I turned toward them, coffee cup in hand. "You know, drivers who've been through the closed section." The 3 men looked at me with varying degrees of interest. The one who'd mentioned the convoys nodded. "Sure, it's becoming a regular thing, apparently. Last-minute calls, night runs, pilot car escorts. Always the same setup." "What else did they say about it?" He shrugged. "Not much. Most guys don't want to talk about it. But I get the sense something about those runs bothers people. Little things that don't add up." "Like what?" "Time discrepancies. Signs that shouldn't be there. The feeling that you're not alone on the road even when you should be." He studied me over the rim of his coffee cup. "You run it recently?" "Last night." "And?" I hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding it from people who already understood. "Everything you just described." plus a truck ahead of us that the checkpoint workers claimed didn't exist. One of the other drivers, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "Did your escort lose radio contact for a while?" "Yeah, about 10 minutes of dead air, then it just came back." Same thing happened to a friend of mine. He said it was like the road didn't want them talking to each other, wanted them isolated. The driver set down his coffee and stood. "My advice? Don't take another run through there if they offer it. Whatever's happening on that closed highway, it's not right." He left the lounge, and the conversation moved on to other topics. I drank my coffee in silence, thinking about everything I'd heard. A pattern was emerging, and it was deeply unsettling. This wasn't an isolated incident. Drivers had been experiencing the same phenomena on Route 47 for months, maybe longer. And yet officially, none of it was happening. The road was closed, the permits didn't exist, the experiences couldn't be verified. I pulled out my phone and tried calling Brenna. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I left a message asking her to call me back, then headed out to my truck. The afternoon was clear and bright, the earlier strangeness feeling distant and almost dreamlike. I had another load to pick up in 2 days, a straightforward haul that would take me down to California and back. Normal work, normal routes, normal schedules. But first, I needed to understand what had happened on Route 47. I drove to the local library in Wenatchee and used their public computers to search for information about the highway closure. The official DOT website confirmed what I already knew. Route 47 had been closed since February following a mudslide that had damaged the roadbed in multiple locations. Repairs were ongoing, with no confirmed reopening date. I dug deeper, searching for news articles or public records about the closure. What I found was surprisingly sparse. A few brief mentions in local newspapers about the initial mudslide, some complaints from businesses about the detour adding costs to their logistics, and then nothing. For a major highway closure that had lasted 7 months, there was remarkably little public discussion. On a hunch, I searched for accidents or incidents on Route 47 prior to the closure. That yielded more results. Over the previous 5 years, there had been an unusual number of single-vehicle accidents on the closed section. Trucks leaving the roadway, sometimes fatally. The reports were always similar. Experienced drivers, good weather conditions, no obvious cause for the loss of control. One article from 3 years ago caught my attention. A driver named Marcus Holt had survived after his rig went off the road at mile marker 136. In his statement to police, he claimed he'd been following another truck that suddenly disappeared, causing him to brake hard and lose control on a curve. Investigators found no evidence of a second vehicle. Mile marker 136. Right in the middle of the section we'd driven through last night. I spent another hour searching but found nothing else useful. Whatever was happening on Route 47, it either wasn't being reported or was being actively suppressed. Neither possibility was comforting. By the time I left the library, the sun was setting. I drove to a truck stop on the outskirts of town and parked for the night, intending to catch up on sleep before my next run. But sleep proved elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those white signs illuminated in my headlights. Keep right. The words felt like an instruction I'd failed to follow, though I had no idea what they actually meant. Around midnight, my phone rang. Brenna's name appeared on the screen. "Lane, sorry I didn't call back earlier. I've been dealing with some confusion at the office." "What kind of confusion?" "The kind where my route logs for last night don't match the actual route I drove. According to the GPS data from my escort vehicle, I spent the entire night on Route 5, but I know damn well I was on Route 47. Same with my logs. Dispatch claims they have no record of authorizing that run." Brenna was quiet for a moment. "Lane, I need to tell you something. This wasn't my first time through that section. It was my fourth, and each time it's been stranger than the last. The old driver at the fuel stop said the same thing. Said you'd escorted him through there months ago. Probably did. I've lost track of how many of these runs I've done. They all blur together after a while. But there's a pattern to them. They always happen at night. They're always last-minute authorizations, and they always involve loads that need to go through that specific section, even though the detour would work just fine. So someone's deliberately routing trucks through a closed highway. Why? I don't know, but I've been keeping notes. Small details that don't fit. Like those signs we saw, they're not there during the day." I sat up straighter in my bunk. "You've driven through there during daylight?" "Once, about a month ago. I got curious after a particularly weird night run, so I drove through the section the next day just to see what it looked like. The barriers were in place at both ends, but I hiked around them. The road looked normal, well-maintained, recently paved, but there were no signs except the standard mile markers and curve warnings. Those keep and right signs only appear at night. That's impossible." "I know, but I saw what I saw. Or rather, I didn't see them during the day." I thought about the sign sitting on my dashboard. "Brenna, I have one of those signs. A physical sign that says keep. I found it in my cab after the run." "You're kidding." "I'm looking at it right now. It's real, solid. I didn't imagine it." "Lane, I think we need to talk to someone about this. Someone with authority to actually investigate what's happening." "Who?" "We can't prove any of it. Our logs say we were somewhere else. The authorization paperwork apparently doesn't exist. All we have are stories that sound crazy. Then we find other drivers who've been through there, get enough testimonies, and someone will have to take it seriously." It was a reasonable plan, but something about it felt wrong. The more I thought about those night runs, the more convinced I became that someone didn't want them investigated. The missing records, the GPS discrepancies, the carefully orchestrated timing. This wasn't accidental, it was deliberate. "Be careful," I told Brenna. "If this is intentional, if someone's running some kind of operation using that closed highway, they're not going to appreciate people asking questions. What kind of operation moves legitimate freight on a closed road in the middle of the night? That's what worries me." We agreed to stay in touch and share any new information we uncovered. After the call ended, I lay in my bunk staring at the ceiling of my sleeper cab. Outside, the truck stop hummed with its usual late-night activity. Trucks coming and going, drivers grabbing showers or food, the ambient noise of diesel engines and air brakes. All of it normal, all of it explicable. But I couldn't shake the memory of that closed highway, the sensation of driving through space that felt fundamentally wrong despite looking perfectly ordinary. And I couldn't stop thinking about that other truck I'd seen ahead of us, the one that had simply vanished. Where had it gone? And more importantly, where had it come from? I must have eventually fallen asleep because I woke to sunlight streaming through my windshield and my phone ringing. I fumbled for it, expecting Brenna or maybe dispatch with my next assignment. Instead, it was a number I didn't recognize. Local area code, but not one I had saved. "This is Lane. Mr. Rochford, my name is Tolliver Reams. I'm a supervisor with the Washington State Department of Transportation. I understand you drove through a closed section of Route 47 last night." My mouth went dry. "How did you get this number?" "Your escort service provided it. Ms. Salvo filed a report this morning expressing concerns about the condition of the highway and some irregularities she observed. I'd like to ask you a few questions, if you have time." "What kind of questions?" "Just routine follow-up regarding your experience on the closed section." We take all reports seriously, particularly those involving our contractor personnel and road conditions. His voice was professional, neutral. It would be helpful if we could meet in person. Are you still in the Wenatchee area? Something about this felt off. How had Brenna filed a report when she'd told me just hours ago that no official record of our route existed? And why would a DOT supervisor personally follow up on a report about a closed highway? I can meet with you, I said carefully. Where and when? There's a way station about 10 miles south of Wenatchee on Route 97. I'll be there at 10 o'clock this morning. Will that work for you? I checked the time. It was 8:15. I can be there. Excellent. I look forward to speaking with you, Mr. Rochford. The call ended before I could ask any more questions. I tried calling Brenna immediately, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message asking her to call me urgently, then started my rig and headed for the way station. The drive took 20 minutes. The way station was a standard setup. A large scale embedded in the roadway, a small building for the inspectors, and a parking area where trucks could be pulled aside for detailed inspections. At this hour, it was relatively quiet, with only a couple of commercial vehicles going through the weighing process. I pulled into the parking area and shut down my engine. A man in a DOT uniform emerged from the building and walked toward my truck. He was tall and thin, maybe 50, with the kind of posture that suggested military background. I climbed down from the cab as he approached. "Mr. Rochford?" "That's me. You're Tolliver Reams?" "I am." He didn't offer to shake hands. "Thank you for meeting with me. I know this is an unusual request, but the situation requires some clarification." "What situation exactly?" "Your unauthorized transit through a closed highway. Route 47 has been closed to all traffic since February. Yet, according to GPS data from your vehicle's onboard tracking system, you spent approximately 3 hours on that route last night. I had authorization, a pilot car escort, proper permits, the whole thing. I'm sure that's what you were told. Unfortunately, no such authorization was issued by our department. The permits you were shown were falsified." I felt anger rising. I'm not in the habit of driving on closed highways without proper clearance. If the permits were fake, that's not my fault. Someone at my company arranged the authorization. We've spoken with your dispatcher. They have no record of arranging any such route. Reams pulled out a tablet and consulted it. "In fact, according to your company's records, you spent last night on Route 5 transporting bridge components to a construction site near Bellingham, which you did successfully. The delivery was signed for at 9:30 this morning." "That's impossible. I made that delivery hours ago before noon yesterday." Reams studied me with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been something else. "Mr. Rochford, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to answer honestly. Have you been experiencing any unusual stress lately? Problems sleeping, perhaps? Gaps in memory? You think I imagined this? I think you've been driving long hours in difficult conditions. It's not uncommon for fatigue to create confusion about routes and timing. Your delivery was completed successfully, you're not in any trouble, and there's no evidence you were actually on Route 47 last night. The simplest explanation is that you're misremembering the sequence of events. I have physical evidence. A sign from that road. May I see it?" I climbed back into my cab and retrieved the white sign from the dashboard. When I handed it to Reams, he examined it briefly, then handed it back. "This is a standard DOT marker. They're used on active highways throughout the state. You could have picked this up anywhere." "But I didn't. I found it in my cab after driving through Route 47. Reams closed his tablet and fixed me with a steady gaze. "Mr. Rochford, I'm going to give you some advice. Whatever you think happened last night, I suggest you let it go. The road was closed, you have a successful delivery on record, and there's no evidence of any irregularities. Continuing to pursue this will only raise questions about your fitness to maintain a commercial license. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Stop asking questions or face professional consequences. What about Brenna Salvo? She filed a report. She experienced the same things I did. Ms. Salvo has been contacted and advised similarly. She's agreed to withdraw her report in light of the lack of corroborating evidence. Brenna had folded, or been pressured into folding. Reams offered something that might have been meant as a reassuring smile. Go home, Mr. Rochford. Get some rest. In a few days, this will all seem like a bad dream. He walked back to the way station building without waiting for my response. I stood beside my truck, holding the white sign, feeling like I'd just been warned off from something much bigger than a simple bureaucratic mix-up. I tried calling Brenna again. This time, she answered on the first ring. Lane, don't say anything specific, just listen. I'm pulling my report. It's not worth the trouble. You should do the same. Brenna, what did they say to you? Nothing threatening. Just made it very clear that continuing to push this wouldn't be good for my business. They suggested I'd have trouble getting authorized for escort work in the future if I kept filing reports that couldn't be substantiated. She paused. They were polite about it, professional, but the message was clear. So we just pretend it didn't happen. We don't have a choice. There's no evidence, no records, no way to prove any of it. And pushing harder will only hurt us professionally. She was right, and I knew it. But the idea of just letting this go, of pretending that strange night on Route 47 had never occurred, felt like surrendering to something I didn't fully understand. Did you really file a report this morning? I asked. No, I never got the chance. Tolliver Reams called me before I could. It was like he knew I was planning to. Another pause. Lane, I think they were monitoring our phones. There's no other way they could have known so quickly. Then they're listening now. Probably, which is why I'm not going to say anything else. Take care of yourself, Lane, and maybe find a different route for your next few hauls. She ended the call. I stood in the way station parking lot, turning the white sign over in my hands. The word keep stared back at me, its meaning still unclear. An instruction? A warning? A reminder? Keep what? Keep driving? Keep quiet? Keep away? I didn't have answers. All I had was the certainty that something was wrong on Route 47, and that someone with significant resources was working very hard to make sure nobody looked too closely at what was happening there. I climbed back into my cab and stared at my upcoming schedule on the dispatch tablet. My next load was in 2 days, a run down to Sacramento and back. Standard route, standard cargo, nothing unusual. I accepted the assignment and started the engine. As I pulled out of the way station, I caught sight of Tolliver Reams watching from the building window. He raised one hand in a gesture that might have been a wave or might have been a warning. I didn't wave back. The white sign remained on my dashboard as I drove, a small piece of physical evidence that something had happened, even if I could never prove what. I'd keep it there, I decided. A reminder that sometimes the roads we travel hold secrets we're not meant to discover, and that some mysteries, once encountered, never quite let you go. I spent the next 3 days trying to convince myself that Tolliver Reams was right, that exhaustion and stress had created false memories, that the discrepancies were explainable, that the smart thing to do was let it go and move on. The California run went smoothly. I hauled machine parts south, picked up a load of agricultural equipment on the return trip, and kept my head down. Normal work, normal roads, normal life. But the white sign stayed on my dashboard, and every time I glanced at it, I felt the same unease that had settled into my bones during that night on Route 47. On the fourth day, I was parked at a truck stop outside Portland when another driver knocked on my cab door. I didn't recognize him initially, just another face in the endless parade of truckers moving through the Pacific Northwest. But when I rolled down the window, he held up his own white sign, identical to mine. "You're Lane Rochford," he said. It wasn't a question. "Do I know you?" "Name's Kyle Durrance. I drove Route 47 about 5 weeks ago. Heard through the grapevine you did too, recently. Figured we should talk." I gestured for him to climb up, and he settled into the passenger seat, still holding his sign. Up close, I could see he was younger than I'd first thought. Maybe early 30s, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "How did you find me?" I asked. "Wasn't hard. Truckers talk. Word got around that someone else had driven the closed section and actually admitted it. Most guys who've been through there won't say a word about it." He set his sign on the dash next to mine. "But I need to know I'm not crazy, so I tracked you down. What happened on your run?" "Same as yours, probably. Late-night authorization, pilot car escort, road that looked perfect despite being officially closed for repairs. Signs that said, 'Keep and Right.' A truck ahead of us that shouldn't have been there." He paused, and time that didn't work right. I lost almost 2 hours somewhere on that highway. My GPS said I was moving the whole time, but when I came out to the other end, more time had passed than it should have. "Did you report it?" "Tried to. Got the same response you probably did. No record of authorization, no evidence it happened, strong suggestions that I was imagining things or needed to take a break from driving." He leaned forward, lowering his voice even though we were alone in the cab. "But here's what really bothers me. About a week after my run, I started getting calls. Wrong numbers, supposedly, but they'd ask for me by name, then hang up when I answered. Like someone was checking to make sure my phone still worked." "You think they were monitoring you?" "I know they were, because 3 weeks ago, I got pulled over by State Patrol for a random inspection. Nothing wrong with my rig, all my paperwork was perfect, but they went through everything. And when they were done, the trooper made a point of mentioning that it's important to stay on authorized routes. Said there had been reports of commercial vehicles on closed highways, and that anyone caught doing that would face serious penalties. But your records showed you were never on Route 47. "Exactly. So why the warning?" Kyle picked up his sign and turned it over in his hands. "Someone wanted me to know they were watching. Wanted me to understand that even though officially nothing happened, they knew what I'd seen, and they wanted me to keep quiet about it. I thought about my own phone calls since the run. Nothing overtly suspicious, but now that Kyle mentioned it, there had been a few hang-ups. Numbers that didn't leave voicemails. Small things I'd dismissed as spam or misdialed calls." "Have you talked to other drivers?" I asked. "Found out how many people have been through there?" "A few, but most won't admit it, even to another trucker. The ones who will talk all have the same story. Night runs, missing time, strange signs, vehicles that vanish. And all of them got the same message afterward. Forget about it or face consequences." "What about the escort drivers?" "I tried tracking down mine. Company claims she never worked for them. Her phone number doesn't connect anymore." Kyle's expression darkened. "It's like she never existed." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words hanging between us. Brenna had withdrawn her report and stopped answering my calls after that last conversation. I'd assumed she was just being cautious, protecting her business. But what if it was more than that? "There's something else," Kyle continued. "I've been doing some research. Route 47 has been closed 4 times in the past 10 years. Different reasons each time. Mudslides, bridge repairs, road surface problems. But here's the thing. Each closure lasted between 6 and 9 months, and during every closure, there are truckers who claim they were authorized to drive through at night. How many closures are we talking about? 4 that I can confirm. February 2015 to August 2015. November 2016 to June 2017. March 2019 to October 2019. And now this one, starting February of this year. He pulled out his phone and showed me a document he'd compiled. I've talked to at least 2 drivers from each previous closure. They all experienced the same things we did. I studied the timeline. The pattern was undeniable. Roughly every 2 to 3 years, Route 47 would close for an extended period, and during those closures, unauthorized night convoys would run through the supposedly impassable section. Why? I asked. What's the purpose? That's what I've been trying to figure out. The loads are legitimate. The deliveries actually happen. But there's something about that specific route during those specific time frames that requires trucks to move through at night on a closed highway. Could it be some kind of smuggling operation? Maybe. But we're hauling normal freight. I've checked my manifests against what was actually delivered. Nothing missing, nothing added. Whatever's happening, it doesn't seem to involve the cargo itself. I thought about that for a moment. If it wasn't about the cargo, what was it about? The trucks? The drivers? The road itself? Have any of the drivers from previous closures experienced anything after their runs? I asked. Long-term effects? Kyle's expression turned grim. 2 of them are dead. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Marcus Holt, the driver who went off the road at mile marker 136 back in 2017. He survived the crash but died 6 months later. Single vehicle accident on a straight stretch of highway in broad daylight. Investigators couldn't explain why he left the road. And the other? Woman named Patricia Klein. She drove the route in 2019. Died last year in her sleep. Heart failure, according to the death certificate. She was 43, no previous heart problems. Perfectly healthy. Kyle put his phone away. Could be coincidences. But 2 drivers who both experienced strange things on Route 47, both dead within a few years of their runs, that bothers me. It bothered me too, a lot. What are you planning to do with this information? I asked. I don't know yet. Part of me wants to take it to the media, make enough noise that someone has to investigate. But the other part knows that's probably a good way to end up like Marcus or Patricia. He met my eyes. I'm telling you because I think we need to stick together. Whatever's happening, the people behind it don't want it exposed. They've got enough resources to falsify records, pressure law enforcement, and make people disappear from databases. Going up against that alone is suicide. But going up against it together might just be slower suicide. Maybe. Or maybe if enough of us speak up, they can't silence all of us. I wanted to believe that. But I'd seen how quickly Brenna had been pressured into silence. How efficiently Tolliver Reams had made the official record contradict reality. These weren't amateurs running a small-time operation. This was organized, well-funded, and connected enough to manipulate state transportation records. Let me think about it, I told Kyle. I need to be careful. I've got a clean safety record and a good reputation. If I start making accusations I can't prove, I'll lose both. Fair enough, but don't think too long. The current closure of Route 47 is supposed to end in December. That's less than 3 months away. If we're going to figure this out, we need to do it while the pattern is still active. He gave me his contact information and climbed down from my cab. I watched him walk back to his own truck, another driver carrying the weight of an experience nobody would believe. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Marcus Holt and Patricia Klein, 2 drivers who'd seen what I'd seen and were now dead. The official explanations might be legitimate. Accidents happen. Heart failures occur. but the timing felt wrong. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and pulled out my laptop. If Kyle could research the previous closures, so could I. I started with newspaper archives, searching for any mentions of Route 47 during the periods he'd identified. The results were sparse but telling. Each closure had been announced with minimal fanfare, usually buried in the back pages of local papers. The reasons given were always vague: emergency repairs, structural concerns, environmental mitigation. Nothing specific enough to verify or challenge. But in the online trucker forums, a different story emerged. During each closure period, there were scattered reports of drivers being contacted for special authorization runs through the closed section. Most of the posts were quickly deleted or dismissed as jokes. The few that remained were met with skepticism or outright mockery. One post from 2017 caught my attention. A driver with the username Highway Ghost had written, "Just finished the strangest run of my career. Can't give details, but if anyone else has driven the ghost road through the mountains lately, I'd like to compare notes. Something isn't right about that route." The post had 3 responses before being locked by a moderator. 2 were jokes about drug use. The third was from another user who'd written simply, "I know what you mean. Check your mirrors." I searched for Highway Ghost's other posts, but the account had been deleted. The user who'd responded had also vanished from the forum. Check your mirrors. What did that mean? I thought back to my own run on Route 47. I'd been checking my mirrors constantly, watching for Brenna's escort vehicle, monitoring traffic that shouldn't have existed. Had I missed something? Some detail that other drivers had noticed? I pulled up the dashcam footage from that night. Most commercial drivers ran cameras now, both for insurance purposes and to protect themselves from false accident claims. I'd never reviewed the footage from the Route 47 run, mainly because I'd been trying to forget about it. The video started as I approached the eastern barrier. Clear enough image quality, though limited by the darkness and the range of the camera's view. I watched myself follow Brenna's SUV through the gap in the barriers, saw the worker replace the concrete block behind us. The footage ran for several minutes, showing nothing unusual, just the white lines of the highway disappearing under my truck, occasional glimpses of Brenna's taillights ahead. Then, at the timestamp corresponding to mile marker 124, something appeared in the upper left corner of the frame. Headlights. Far behind me, barely visible at the edge of the camera's range. I paused the video and zoomed in as much as the resolution would allow. Definitely headlights, and from the height and spacing, definitely another commercial truck. It maintained a steady distance behind me for several minutes before the video lost sight of it around a curve. Why hadn't I noticed it at the time? I'd been checking my mirrors regularly, but my focus had been on what was ahead, on Brenna's escort vehicle and the mysterious truck we'd seen in front of her. I'd never thought to watch what was behind me. I continued reviewing the footage. The truck reappeared periodically, always maintaining the same distance, never getting closer or falling back. It was there when we passed the rest area at mile marker 129. Still there when we went through the first checkpoint, and still following when we approached the second checkpoint near mile marker 144. Then, in the final few minutes of footage before we exited the closed section, the following truck simply vanished. One moment it was there, headlights steady in the distance. The next moment, nothing but empty highway behind me. I rewound and watched the transition frame by frame. There was no turnoff, no side road, nothing that would explain where the truck had gone. It was simply there 1 second and absent the next, as if it had never existed at all. My hands were shaking as I closed the laptop. That truck had followed me for over 20 miles through a closed highway, and I'd never noticed it. More disturbing, it had disappeared without any logical explanation. Check your mirrors. Now I understood what that deleted forum post had meant. We'd all been so focused on the strange things ahead of us, the signs and the vanishing vehicles in front, that we'd missed what was behind us, following us, watching us. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those headlights in my mirrors, maintaining their precise distance, never varying, never announcing their presence. At dawn, I called Kyle. He answered on the second ring, sounding as awake and stressed as I felt. "Did you keep your dashcam footage from your run?" I asked without preamble. "Yeah, why?" "Check your mirrors in the footage. Tell me if you see anything following you." There was a pause, then the sound of a laptop opening. Several minutes of silence followed. "Jesus Christ," Kyle breathed. "How did I not see this?" "Because we weren't looking for it." "Did your truck disappear too?" "Yeah, right before the exit, just gone." More silence. "Lane, this changes things. This isn't just about weird signs and time discrepancies. Something was actively following us, monitoring our progress. Or hurting us." The word hung in the air between us. Hurting implied purpose. Implied that our routes through the closed highway weren't about getting from point A to point B. We were being guided somewhere, observed, measured against some criteria we didn't understand. "We need to see what's at those specific mile markers," Kyle said. "The places where the signs appeared, where vehicles vanished, where Marcus Holt crashed. There's a pattern to the locations, I'm sure of it. The road's still closed. We can't just drive through there during the day. No, but we can hike in, access the highway from Forest Service roads and approach on foot. No authorization needed, no records of our presence." It was risky. If we were caught trespassing on a closed highway, we'd face fines at minimum, possibly criminal charges, but it was also the only way to investigate without tipping off whoever was monitoring the official routes. "When?" I asked. "Soon, before they reopen the road and remove whatever's there. I'll scout the access points and get back to you." After the call ended, I sat in my truck watching the morning traffic build on the highway. Regular people heading to regular jobs, living normal lives that didn't include conspiracy theories about ghost convoys and vanishing vehicles. Part of me envied them. The larger part knew I couldn't let this go, even if the smart thing would be to walk away. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging. Last warning." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. They were monitoring my calls, my movements, probably my online searches too. They wanted me scared, wanted me to back off. Instead, I opened my laptop again and started planning. If Kyle and I were going to investigate Route 47 on foot, we'd need to be smart about it. No phones, no electronic devices that could be tracked. We'd need to approach from multiple angles, document everything we found, and have contingency plans if we were discovered. But most importantly, we'd need to answer the question that had been gnawing at me since that night. What was so important about Route 47 that someone would go to these lengths to control who drove it, when they drove it, and what they remembered afterward? I had a feeling the answer was waiting somewhere on that closed highway, hidden in plain sight like those white signs that only appeared in darkness. 3 days later, Kyle and I met at a trailhead 15 miles from the closed section of Route 47. We'd both taken precautions, leaving our phones in our trucks, telling no one where we were going, bringing cameras with no wireless capability. If someone was tracking us, they'd know we'd stopped here, but not where we went after. The hike took 2 hours through dense forest, following old logging roads that had been abandoned for decades. Kyle had done his research, mapping out an approach that would bring us to the highway near mile marker 136, the spot where Marcus Holt had crashed back in 2017. When we finally reached the highway, pushing through the last screen of trees, I was struck by how normal it looked. Fresh pavement, clean lines, well-maintained shoulders. This wasn't a road in disrepair. This was infrastructure in perfect condition. "They're not repairing the road," Kyle said quietly. "They're using the closure for something else." We walked along the shoulder, studying everything. The pavement, the drainage systems, the guardrails. All of it appeared new or recently maintained. Whatever repairs the mudslide had required, they'd been completed months ago. At mile marker 136, we found the first anomaly. The guardrail on the eastern side showed signs of recent replacement, the metal section slightly newer than the rest. This was where Marcus Holt had crashed, where his truck had broken through and plunged down the embankment. But there was something else. A small, concrete pad, about 3 feet square, set into the ground about 20 feet from the edge of the road. It was flush with the soil, covered with fallen leaves and nearly invisible. If we hadn't been looking carefully, we would have missed it entirely. Kyle brushed away the debris, revealing a surface with several small indentations, regularly spaced, mounting points for something. "What do you think was here?" I asked. "No idea, but it's been removed recently. See how the concrete is cleaner around the edges? Something was bolted down here within the past few months." We took photos from multiple angles, then continued along the highway. Every quarter mile or so, we found another concrete pad, each one carefully hidden in the vegetation just off the shoulder. Some were on the east side of the road, others on the west. All showed signs of having recently supported some kind of equipment. At mile marker 129, near the rest area I'd seen during my night drive, we found something more substantial. Behind the restroom building, concealed by careful landscaping, was a small utility structure. The door was locked, but through a window we could see racks of electronic equipment, dormant but clearly functional. "This is a monitoring station," Kyle said. "They're tracking something on this road. Speed, maybe? Or specific vehicles? Or specific frequencies," I suggested, thinking about the CB radio interference, the way Brenna's communications had cut out for that stretch of highway. We documented everything, taking photos and making detailed notes. By the time we reached mile marker 144, the location of the second checkpoint, the sun was beginning to set. We needed to leave before darkness made the hike back dangerous. But as we turned to go, something caught my eye. A white sign, partially hidden in the brush on the roadside. I pulled it free and held it up. "Keep." Same as the one in my truck, same as Kyle's. But this one was different. On the back, in small printed letters, was a series of numbers. 47 K2237. "It's a reference code," Kyle said. "They're numbering these signs, which means there are at least 2,037 of them, probably more." We stared at each other, the implications sinking in. This wasn't a small operation. This was extensive, organized, and had been running for years. The numbered signs, the monitoring stations, the carefully controlled convoys, all of it pointed to something far larger than we'd imagined. As we hiked back through the darkening forest, neither of us spoke much. We were both processing what we'd found, trying to understand what it meant. Someone was running a sophisticated operation using a closed highway, monitoring specific vehicles during specific time frames, and going to great lengths to ensure nobody investigated too closely. But why? What was the purpose? What were they measuring or testing or transporting that required this level of secrecy and control? When we reached our trucks, Kyle turned to me before climbing into his cab. "Lane, I think we're in over our heads. This isn't just some bureaucratic weirdness or logistics quirk. This is intentional, organized, and whoever's behind it has serious resources." "I know." "So what do we do?" I thought about Marcus Holt and Patricia Klein, about the deleted forum posts and the warnings to stop digging, about Brenna, who'd withdrawn her report and disappeared, about Tolliver Reams and his subtle threat about my commercial license. We document everything, I said finally. Make copies, store them in multiple places, and then we decide if we're brave enough or stupid enough to go public with it. Kyle nodded slowly. And if we're not, then we live with knowing something's wrong, and we keep our heads down and hope they lose interest in us. Neither option felt good, but they were the only choices we had. I drove back to my usual routes, picking up loads and making deliveries, trying to maintain the appearance of normalcy. But the white sign stayed on my dashboard, and every time I checked my mirrors, I found myself looking for headlights that shouldn't be there. The question wasn't whether I'd investigate further. The question was whether I'd survive what I might find. The call came exactly 3 weeks after Kyle and I hiked into Route 47. I was hauling timber through Oregon, my third consecutive week of avoiding the Washington routes, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Lane Rochford? The voice was unfamiliar, male, careful. Who's asking? My name isn't important. What's important is that you stop looking into Route 47. You and Kyle Durrance both. My hands tightened on the wheel. I don't know what you're talking about. The concrete pads, the monitoring station, the numbered signs. You found quite a bit during your little hike. A pause. We know about the photographs. We know about your research, and we're asking you, politely, to delete everything and move on with your life. And if I don't, then we'll be forced to take measures that won't be pleasant for either of us. You have a clean record, Mr. Rochford. Good reputation, steady work. It would be a shame if questions arose about your fitness to drive commercially. Questions about substance abuse, perhaps, or mental health concerns. You can't just, we can, and we will. This is your final warning. Delete the files, forget what you saw, and go back to being a trucker. It's a good life. Don't throw it away over curiosity. The line went dead. I immediately tried calling Kyle, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message telling him to call me urgently, then spent the next hour driving in a state of barely controlled panic. They'd known exactly where we'd been, what we'd found, even about the photos we'd taken with offline cameras. That level of surveillance was terrifying. Kyle called back 2 hours later. His voice was shaken. They contacted you too? Just got off the phone. You? Yesterday. Same message, same threats. Lane, they sent me copies of the photos we took, printed out and mailed to my home address, with a note saying they could just as easily mail them to the state police with an anonymous tip about trespassing. I felt my stomach drop. What are you going to do? What choice do I have? I'm deleting everything. All the research, all the photos, all the contact information for other drivers. I'm done. Kyle, I have a family, Lane. Kids in school. A mortgage. I can't risk everything over this. Whatever's happening on that highway, it's bigger than us and we're not going to stop it. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Marcus and Patricia. I think I understand now what happened to them. They didn't stop digging. The implication hung between us like a weight. Be careful, Kyle said. Delete your files. Forget my number. And whatever you do, don't go back to Route 47. He ended the call, and I knew I wouldn't hear from him again. I drove in silence for the rest of the day, weighing my options. I could do what they wanted, erase everything and pretend none of it had happened. It was the safe choice, the smart choice. Or I could push forward, knowing it might cost me my career, or worse. That night, parked at a rest stop in southern Oregon, I made my decision. I copied all my files onto 3 separate USB drives, mailed 2 of them to addresses only I knew about, and kept the 3rd hidden in my truck. Then I deleted everything from my laptop and phone, just as they'd demanded. But I didn't forget. And I didn't stop paying attention. Over the next month, I kept my head down and my routes normal. I hauled loads up and down the West Coast, avoiding Washington entirely. I didn't research Route 47, didn't contact other drivers, didn't give any indication that I was still thinking about what I'd seen, but I was. Every day, every mile, I was thinking about it. And I was noticing things, small things, patterns, certain trucks that appeared repeatedly at different stops, always maintaining distance, never making contact. The same makes and models, different plates, but similar enough to be part of a fleet. They never approached me, never gave any indication they were following me, but they were there. In my mirrors, at fuel stops, in parking lots, I started documenting them, memorizing plate numbers and taking mental notes. After a week, I'd identified at least 6 different vehicles that appeared too frequently to be coincidence. After 2 weeks, I was certain I was under active surveillance. They were watching me, making sure I kept my word, making sure I stayed away from Route 47. Which is exactly why, in the 3rd week of November, I accepted a load that would take me back through Washington. The call from dispatch was routine. They needed someone to haul construction equipment from Portland to Spokane, leaving in 2 days. The route would take me north through Washington on Interstate 5, then east on Route 90. Nowhere near Route 47. I accepted the assignment. But once I was on the road, I made a decision that I knew was either brave or suicidal, and I wasn't sure which. Instead of taking the assigned route, I diverted north toward the closed section of Route 47. I wanted to see it again, in daylight, from a distance. I wanted to confirm that what Kyle and I had found was still there. I approached from a different access road, parking my empty rig at a trailhead and hiking in on foot. No phone, no camera, nothing that could be tracked or recorded. Just me and the forest and the growing certainty that I was making a terrible mistake. The hike took 90 minutes. When I finally reached a vantage point overlooking the highway near mile marker 138, I stopped and stared. The road was gone. Not closed. Not under construction. Gone. Where the highway should have been, there was nothing but raw earth and construction equipment. Massive sections of pavement had been torn up, leaving deep furrows in the landscape. The concrete pads we'd found were gone, the monitoring station demolished. Even the guardrails had been removed in long sections. It looked like a genuine construction zone now, like they were actually repairing the road, not just pretending to close it. But we'd been here 3 weeks ago. The road had been perfect, the pavement had been new. There was no way they could have torn up this much infrastructure in such a short time. Unless they'd started the moment they knew we'd been there. The moment they knew someone had documented the truth. I stood at the edge of the trees, watching construction workers operate heavy machinery in the distance. They were doing real work, creating a real construction site, manufacturing evidence that the road had always been in disrepair, building a cover story that would explain the closure and discredit anything Kyle or I might say about what we'd found. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw him. A man in a DOT vest, standing at the far edge of the construction zone, looking directly at me. Even from 100 yards away, I recognized him. Tolliver Reams. He didn't wave, didn't shout, just stood there, watching me, making sure I understood the message. They knew I was here. They knew I hadn't let it go, and they were warning me one last time. I hiked back to my truck faster than I'd come in, my heart pounding. By the time I reached the trailhead, I was nearly running. I climbed into my cab, started the engine, and pulled onto the highway without looking back. But I couldn't shake the image of Tolliver Reams standing at the edge of that torn-up road, watching me with an expression that wasn't quite threatening but wasn't reassuring either. It was the look of someone who'd won, who knew they'd won, and who was giving me one last chance to accept defeat gracefully. I drove straight through to Spokane, delivered my load, and immediately accepted another haul going south, away from Washington, away from Route 47, away from whatever was happening on that highway that required this level of control and secrecy. That night, parked at a truck stop in Idaho, I received a text from an unknown number. No words, just an image. A photograph of my truck, taken that afternoon at the trailhead near Route 47. The angle suggested it had been taken from the trees, from someone watching me arrive and depart. They'd been there the whole time, watching me watch them, making sure I understood there was nowhere I could go, nothing I could do that they wouldn't know about. I deleted the text and sat in the darkness of my cab, listening to the sounds of the truck stop around me. Diesel engines idling, air brakes hissing, the distant murmur of other drivers' conversations. Normal sounds from a normal place where normal people did normal work. But I knew now that beneath that normalcy was something else. A pattern of control and surveillance that reached further than I'd imagined. They hadn't just monitored me on Route 47. They'd been watching me for weeks afterward, tracking my movements, documenting my research, staying one step ahead of every move I made. And the most terrifying part was that I still didn't know why. What was so important about that highway? What were they testing or measuring or transporting that required this level of operational security? I pulled out the white sign I'd kept on my dashboard, the one that said, "Keep." I turned it over, looking at the blank back, and wondered if there had been numbers on this one too that had faded over time. Wondered how many of these signs existed, scattered across how many miles of highway, marking how many years of secret convoys. My phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number. "Good choice. Enjoy your career, Mr. Rochford." They'd been watching me leave Washington. They'd seen me take the southern route, and they were satisfied that I'd gotten the message. I wanted to feel relieved. Instead, I felt hollow. I'd come close to something significant, something that mattered, and I'd been forced to walk away from it. Not because I was convinced it was nothing, but because I wasn't brave enough to face what pursuing it would cost. Over the following weeks, I fell back into my old routines, accepting loads, making deliveries, maintaining my schedule. The surveillance vehicles disappeared from my mirrors. The suspicious phone calls stopped. Everything returned to normal, or at least the appearance of normal, but I kept the white sign on my dashboard, a reminder of what I'd seen and what I'd chosen not to pursue. And I kept checking my mirrors, especially at night, especially on empty highways, looking for headlights that maintained too perfect a distance, for vehicles that appeared and vanished without explanation, for signs that only existed in darkness. 3 months passed. Route 47 officially reopened in late February, almost exactly a year after it had closed. The State Transportation Department issued a brief statement about completing necessary repairs to address mudslide damage and infrastructure concerns. No mention of night convoys or unauthorized access. No acknowledgement that anything unusual had ever occurred. I was hauling a load through Washington when I saw the announcement. My route didn't take me near Route 47, but I found myself diverting just to see it, to confirm it was really open again. The barriers were gone. Traffic flowed normally in both directions. The construction equipment had vanished, replaced by fresh pavement and new guardrails. Everything looked perfect, professional, exactly as a reopened highway should look. I pulled over at the rest area near mile marker 129. the one I'd seen during my night run almost 6 months earlier. In daylight, it looked completely ordinary. Clean facilities, maintained grounds, a few other vehicles parked for breaks. Nothing sinister or strange. I walked to the restroom building and around to the back, where Kyle and I had found the monitoring station. The structure was gone. No trace of it remained, just landscaping and an empty space that could have been anything. As I stood there, another truck pulled into the rest area. I watched it park, watched the driver climb down and stretch, watched him walk toward the facilities. He moved with the casual confidence of someone on a routine stop, someone who'd never experienced anything unusual on this road. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe whatever had been happening here was over now, concluded, or moved elsewhere, or simply stopped for reasons I'd never understand. Or maybe he had experienced it, and like me, he'd chosen to keep quiet, to accept the official story and live with the weight of unexplained memories. I returned to my truck and pulled back onto the highway. Route 47 stretched ahead of me, perfectly normal in the afternoon light. Cars and trucks moved at standard speeds. The pavement was smooth. The signs were exactly where they should be, displaying the information they were supposed to display. But as I drove, I couldn't help noticing small things. A concrete pad visible in the brush at mile marker 132, partially concealed but still there. Fresh asphalt at mile marker 136 that was slightly different in color from the surrounding surface. A utility access panel at mile marker 144 that seemed newer than it should be. Details that might mean nothing, or might mean everything. I drove through the entire closed section without incident, emerging at the western end where I'd exited that night 6 months ago. Everything was normal. Everything was explicable. Everything made sense. But in my mirrors, I caught sight of a truck that had been behind me since I'd entered the Route 47 section, maintaining a steady distance, never getting closer, never falling back. The same behavior I'd seen in my dash cam footage from that night drive. I watched it for the next 20 miles. It stayed there, constant and unwavering, until I exited onto a different highway. Then it continued straight, disappearing into the flow of traffic as if it had never been following me at all. Maybe it hadn't. Maybe I was seeing patterns where none existed, reading significance into ordinary coincidence. Or maybe they were still watching, still monitoring, still making sure that drivers who'd seen too much understood the consequences of talking. That night, I parked at a truck stop and checked my phone. There was a message from a number I didn't recognize, sent hours earlier while I'd been driving through Route 47. "Welcome back," it said. Nothing more. They'd known I was there, known I'd diverted from my assigned route, known I'd stopped at the rest area and looked for the monitoring station. And they wanted me to know they knew. I deleted the message and sat in the darkness of my cab, thinking about Marcus Holt and Patricia Klein, about Kyle, who'd deleted everything and disappeared from my life, about Brenna, who'd withdrawn her report and stopped answering calls, about all the other drivers who'd experienced something strange on Route 47 and chosen to stay silent rather than risk what speaking up might cost. We were all out here, scattered across the highways of America, carrying our unexplained memories and our unanswered questions, connected by an experience we couldn't prove and wouldn't discuss, isolated by our knowledge of something that officially never happened. The white sign still sat on my dashboard, the word "keep" facing me like an instruction I'd never fully understood. Keep driving, keep quiet, keep pretending everything was normal. I started my engine and pulled back onto the highway. Ahead of me, the road stretched into darkness, disappearing beyond the reach of my headlights. Behind me, in my mirrors, I could see the lights of other trucks following their own routes to their own destinations. And somewhere among them, I knew, were the vehicles that watched and followed and made sure that secrets stayed secret. I'd made my choice. I'd survive by staying silent, by accepting that some questions wouldn't be answered and some experiences wouldn't be explained. It was the smart choice, the safe choice. But as I drove through the night, I couldn't help wondering about the next driver who'd receive a late-night call about a special authorization run through a closed highway, about whether they'd notice the signs that shouldn't exist and the trucks that vanished without explanation, about whether they'd be brave enough or foolish enough to ask questions. And I wondered if, when they did, they'd find the same walls of silence I'd found, the same careful erasure of evidence, the same quiet pressure to forget what they'd seen and accept what they'd been told. The highway stretched on, mile after mile, under stars that offered no answers. My CB radio occasionally crackled with chatter from other drivers, normal conversation about weather and traffic and which truck stops had the best coffee. But every so often, buried in the static, I thought I heard something else. A word, repeated and faint, barely audible beneath the noise, right. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of frequency overlap or atmospheric interference. Nothing more than random sounds shaped by a mind looking for patterns. But I heard it again at mile marker 183, and again at mile marker 207. Right, right, right. I didn't respond. I didn't acknowledge it. I just kept driving, my hand steady on the wheel, my eyes on the road ahead, my mind carefully avoiding the questions I knew better than to ask. The white sign caught the glow of my instrument panel, the word keep casting a small shadow across my dashboard. I left it there, a reminder of what I'd seen and what I'd chosen not to pursue. And in my mirrors, barely visible in the darkness, a pair of headlights maintained their perfect distance, following me through the night, watching, waiting, making sure I kept driving, making sure I kept quiet, making sure I kept the secrets that Route 47 demanded be kept. The highway continued, endless and dark, carrying all of us forward into a night that offered no explanations and promised no relief. Just the endless progression of miles and the certainty that some roads, once traveled, never really let you leave. I checked my mirrors again. The headlights were still there. They would always be there. I drove on. The Mojave doesn't forgive mistakes, which is why I'd been running this route for 12 years without incident. Fuel management, rest stops, timing, everything had to be precise when you're hauling refrigerated goods across 300 miles of desert where the temperature can hit 115 degrees by noon. I knew every truck stop, every reliable fuel station, every safe place to pull over if something went wrong, which is why the call from dispatch felt wrong from the start. Wendell Croy? The voice on the phone was familiar but strained, like the woman was reading from a script she didn't quite understand. "That's me, Sarah. What's the situation?" "We need you to take a load from Barstow to Las Vegas tonight. Refrigerated pharmaceuticals, temperature critical. But there's a complication with the route." I was sitting in my rig at a truck stop outside Barstow, halfway through a burger and looking forward to 8 hours of sleep before my next scheduled run. A last-minute pharmaceutical haul meant good money, but it also meant pressure and zero margin for error. What kind of complication? Fuel, your normal stops along Route 127 are experiencing supply issues. Some kind of tanker delay. We're arranging for you to rendezvous with a fuel truck at designated coordinates. They'll top you off at the halfway point. I set down my burger. In 12 years, I'd never done a mobile refueling operation in the middle of the desert. It wasn't unheard of. Military operations did it. Emergency services sometimes arranged it. But for a routine commercial haul, it was bizarre. Why not just delay the run until the stations are resupplied? Time-sensitive cargo. The client needs delivery before 6 a.m. tomorrow. If we delay, the contract specifies significant penalties. Sarah paused. Look, Wendell, I wouldn't ask if we had another option. You're our most reliable driver for this route. The fuel truck will be operated by Jude Calhoun from Western Tanker Services. Professional operation, everything by the book. What are the coordinates? She read off a location that put the rendezvous point about halfway between Barstow and Las Vegas, in one of the emptier stretches of the Mojave. Not completely isolated. Route 127 saw regular traffic, but remote enough that you couldn't count on help if something went wrong. The tanker will meet you at 1:30 a.m. Transfer should take 20 minutes maximum. You'll have plenty of fuel to reach Vegas with room to spare. I thought about it. The money was good, and I'd worked with Western Tanker Services before. They were legitimate, professional. If Jude Calhoun was one of their drivers, he'd know what he was doing. All right, I said finally. Send me the complete route and the exact coordinates, and I want Calhoun's phone number in case we need to coordinate. Already emailing it to you, thanks, Wendell. This really helps us out. After the call ended, I pulled up the route on my laptop. Everything looked standard except for the fuel stop, which was marked as a GPS coordinate rather than an actual station. The location was a rest area I'd passed dozens of times. A bare-bones setup with parking and restrooms but no services. Adequate for a quick fuel transfer. I tried calling the number Sarah had provided for Jude Calhoun, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message confirming the rendezvous time and location, then finished my meal and ran through my pre-trip inspection. The load was already waiting for me at a pharmaceutical distributor's warehouse. Climate-controlled cargo, insulin, and other medications that needed to stay between 36 and 46 degrees Fahrenheit. The refrigeration unit on my trailer was running perfectly, and I spent extra time verifying the temperature monitoring systems. If this cargo spoiled because of equipment failure, it wouldn't just cost money, it would cost people their medication. I pulled out of Barstow at 11:15 p.m., giving myself plenty of time to reach the rendezvous point by 1:30. The night was clear and cool, the kind of desert evening where you could see stars stretching from horizon to horizon. Traffic was light, mostly long-haul truckers and the occasional passenger vehicle. Route 127 cut north through the Mojave, a straight line through some of the most desolate landscape in North America. During the day, the heat radiating off the desert floor created mirages that made the road seem to ripple like water. At night, it was just darkness punctuated by the occasional lights of distant towns and the steady glow of my instrument panel. I passed through Baker around midnight, noting that the truck stop there was indeed closed for fuel service. A handwritten sign taped to the pumps apologized for the inconvenience and directed customers to alternative locations 40 miles in either direction. So, that part of the story checked out. The desert stretched endlessly on both sides of the highway, disappearing into darkness beyond the reach of my headlights. I kept the radio on, listening to late-night talk shows and occasional trucker chatter on the CB. Somebody reported a disabled vehicle near mile marker 89. Someone else warned about a highway patrol speed trap near the Nevada border. Normal traffic, normal night. At 1:15 a.m., I started watching for the rest area that marked the rendezvous point. It appeared right where it should have. A small turnoff with a parking loop and a concrete restroom building. But there was no tanker truck waiting. I pulled into the rest area and parked, leaving my engine running to keep the refrigeration unit operating. The temperature gauge showed the cargo holding steady at 39 degrees, everything working as it should. I tried calling Jude Calhoun again. This time the call connected, but before anyone spoke, I heard only static and what might have been wind noise. "Calhoun, this is Wendell Croy. I'm at the rendezvous point. More static, then a voice, faint and broken. 20 minutes. GPS coordinates. You're breaking up. Are you 20 minutes out? Confirmed. Watch for. The line went dead. I checked the GPS coordinates Sarah had sent me. They matched my current location exactly. So either Calhoun was running late, or I'd misunderstood the timing. I climbed down from my cab and walked around my rig, checking everything out of habit. The trailer's refrigeration unit hummed steadily. The tires looked good. The fuel gauge showed just over half a tank, which would normally be plenty to reach Las Vegas, but with the added weight of the pharmaceutical cargo and the need to run the refrigeration continuously, I'd be cutting it close without the refuel. The rest area was empty except for my truck. No other vehicles. No lights except the single pole lamp illuminating the restroom building. In the distance, I could see the lights of occasional vehicles passing on the highway, but none turned in. At 1:50 a.m., headlights finally appeared, approaching from the south. A large tanker truck, moving at steady speed, turned into the rest area and pulled up parallel to my rig. The side of the truck displayed Western Tanker Services markings, exactly as expected. A man climbed down from the cab. He was maybe 40, wearing work coveralls and a cap, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd done this job many times. He walked over to my truck and nodded. "Wendell Croy?" "That's me." "Jude Calhoun?" "Yeah, sorry about the delay. Had some confusion about the exact coordinates." He gestured to his tanker. "Let's get you fueled up so you can make your delivery." The transfer process was straightforward. Calhoun positioned his tanker properly, connected the fuel lines to my truck's tanks, and started the pump. The familiar smell of diesel filled the air as fuel flowed from his tanker into my rig. "You do many of these mobile refueling operations?" I asked, watching the gauge. "Few a year. Usually, emergency situations or remote locations where it's easier to bring fuel to the truck than bring the truck to the fuel." He checked his flow meter. "This one's a bit unusual, though. Normally, we coordinate these things weeks in advance, not day of." "Yeah, dispatch made it sound urgent. Something about fuel supply problems." Calhoun frowned. "First I've heard of any supply issues in this area. Our distribution network's been running normal all week." That caught my attention. "So why the mobile refueling?" "Above my pay grade. I got the call this afternoon. They sent me coordinates and a time, and here I am." He tapped the meter. "You're at 3/4. Want me to top you off?" "Yeah, go ahead." The transfer took another 10 minutes. When we were done, Calhoun disconnected the lines, secured everything on his tanker, and handed me a receipt from a handheld device. "Sign here confirming volume and no spills." I signed the electronic pad and checked the receipt. Everything looked standard. Volume, rate, timestamp. But something about the timestamp bothered me. It showed 11:47 p.m., nearly 2 hours earlier than the actual transfer time. "Your device is showing the wrong time," I pointed out. Calhoun looked at the screen and frowned. "That's weird. It was right when I left the depot." He pulled out his phone to check, then his frown deepened. "My phone says 11:52, but that can't be right. We've been here at least 15 minutes. I checked my own phone. It showed 2:17 a.m., which felt accurate based on when I'd left Barstow and how long I'd been driving. But Calhoun's phone was clearly wrong by over 2 hours. "Maybe your phone's dead battery or something," I suggested. "Lost track of time." "Maybe." But Calhoun looked unsettled. "Look, I need to get back to the depot. You're all set. Got plenty of fuel to reach Vegas and then some. Drive safe." He climbed back into his tanker and pulled out of the rest area, heading south the way he'd come. I watched his taillights disappear into the darkness, that nagging feeling of wrongness still present. I tried calling dispatch to confirm the refueling was complete, but my phone showed no signal. Not unusual in this part of the desert, but frustrating. I climbed back into my cab and checked all my gauges. Fuel tank showed full, refrigeration unit running perfectly, cargo temperature holding at 39 degrees. Everything was fine. Everything was working exactly as it should. So, why did I feel like something had just gone very wrong? I pulled back onto Route 127 and continued north toward Las Vegas. The highway stretched ahead, empty and dark, with no other vehicles visible in either direction. According to my GPS, I was making good time. I'd reach Vegas well before the 6 a.m. delivery deadline. But my GPS was showing something odd. The distance to my destination kept displaying the same number, 142 miles, even though I'd been driving for over 20 minutes since leaving the rest area. The road was definitely passing beneath my wheels, the mile markers were progressing normally, but the GPS distance wasn't decreasing. I reset the GPS thinking it had frozen. When it rebooted, it showed my location correctly but still indicated 142 miles to Las Vegas. The same distance it had shown when I first left the rest area. I tried my phone's navigation app. Same result. 142 miles, unchanging despite my steady progress north. I told myself it was a satellite issue, some kind of temporary glitch in the GPS network. It happened occasionally in remote areas. The mile markers were the real measure of progress, and they were ticking by normally. Mile marker 104. Mile marker 105. Mile marker 106. At mile marker 108, I passed a truck stop. Or rather, I passed the lights of what looked like a truck stop about a quarter mile off the highway. I didn't remember a fuel station at this location, but desert highways sometimes had services that came and went. I made a mental note of it and continued driving. 15 minutes later, I passed what looked like the same truck stop. Same configuration of lights, same distance from the highway, same general appearance. But according to my odometer, I'd traveled nearly 12 miles since the first sighting. I slowed down and checked my mile marker. Mile marker 121. I definitely covered the distance. But the truck stop shouldn't have appeared twice, unless I'd somehow looped back on myself, which was impossible on a straight desert highway. My CB radio crackled to life, making me jump. Anybody on this channel, this is southbound hauler looking for a fuel stop. Can anyone confirm if the Baker station is still closed? I recognized the voice. It was the same trucker who'd reported the disabled vehicle earlier in the night, hours ago. I keyed my mic. Baker's closed for fuel. Sign says they're expecting a resupply tomorrow. Static, then. Copy that. Guess I'll push through to Barstow. Thanks for the info. The exchange was normal enough, but something bothered me about it. That trucker had been asking about Baker 3 hours ago. Why was he asking again now, as if the previous conversation had never happened? I checked my phone's call log. The 2 calls with Jude Calhoun were there, time-stamped at 1:18 a.m. and 1:21 a.m. But my phone's current time display showed 12:04 a.m. That wasn't possible. I'd left Barstow at 11:15 p.m. I'd been driving for hours. It couldn't be just after midnight. I pulled over onto the shoulder and put my truck in park. My hands were shaking slightly as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Every clock in my truck, the dashboard display, my phone, even my wristwatch, showed times just after midnight. But that meant I'd somehow lost 2.5 hours somewhere between leaving Barstow and now. Or gained them. I couldn't tell which. The cargo temperature gauge still showed 39 degrees. The fuel tank showed full. According to my odometer, I'd driven 87 miles from Barstow. All of that was consistent with having been on the road for over 2 hours. But the clock said otherwise. I sat there on the shoulder for 10 minutes, trying to think through the situation logically. I needed to make the delivery in Las Vegas by 6 a.m. Based on my GPS, which still stubbornly showed 142 miles to destination, I had plenty of time. Based on my clocks, I had even more time than I thought. The smart thing would be to keep driving, to make the delivery, collect my payment, and figure out the time discrepancy later. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Maybe I was more tired than I realized and had lost track of time. But I couldn't shake the memory of Jude Calhoun's confused expression when he'd looked at his phone and seen the wrong time, or the way that truck stop had appeared twice where it should only have appeared once. Something was wrong with this stretch of highway. Something that affected time, or distance, or perception in ways I didn't understand. I pulled back onto Route 127 and continued north. But now I was watching everything more carefully. The mile markers, the GPS distance, the clock displays, any landmarks or features that might repeat. At mile marker 128, I passed a rest area on the right side of the highway. It was dark, no other vehicles, just a parking loop and restrooms like dozens of others along this route. At mile marker 133, I passed what looked like the same rest area. Same configuration, same features, same dark emptiness. But it couldn't be the same rest area. I'd driven 5 miles between sightings. There should have been 5 miles of empty desert, not a duplicate facility. I marked the location in my notebook and kept driving. My fuel gauge, which should have dropped slightly by now, still showed completely full. My trip odometer, which I'd reset when leaving Barstow, showed 94 miles traveled. But my GPS distance to Las Vegas remained unchanged at 142 miles. The numbers didn't add up. Nothing added up. I tried calling dispatch again, but my phone still showed no signal. I tried the CB radio but heard only static on all channels. The occasional burst of voice, fragments of conversations that sounded distant and distorted, but nothing I could respond to coherently. At mile marker 147, something caught my attention in the darkness ahead. Lights, but not from a vehicle or structure. They seemed to be floating above the desert floor, pale and steady, clustered in a group about a mile off the highway. I slowed down, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. As I got closer, the lights resolved into what looked like a small building. A structure that shouldn't have been there in a location where I'd never seen any development before. But as I drew parallel with the lights, they suddenly went dark. Complete and instant, as if someone had flipped a switch. One moment they were there, the next moment, nothing but darkness. I continued past, checking my mirrors. The lights didn't return. My hands were tight on the wheel now, tension building in my shoulders. I'd been driving this route for 12 years. I knew every landmark, every feature, every structure visible from the highway, and I'd never seen lights in that location before. The highway stretched ahead, straight and empty, disappearing into darkness beyond my headlights' reach. Behind me, my trailer's refrigeration unit hummed steadily, keeping the pharmaceutical cargo at proper temperature. All my systems were functioning normally, but nothing about this night felt normal anymore. At mile marker 156, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. A vehicle approaching from behind, moving faster than I was. As it got closer, I could see it was a tanker truck. The same tanker truck. Western Tanker Services markings visible in my side mirrors as it pulled into the passing lane. Jude Calhoun's truck, which should have been heading south toward his depot, was instead heading north on Route 127. The tanker passed me and continued ahead, its taillights disappearing into the darkness. I grabbed my CB mic. "Calhoun, this is Wendell Croy. What are you doing heading north?" Static, no response. I tried again. "Jude Calhoun, Western Tanker Services. Do you copy?" More static, then a burst of voice, distorted and broken. "Coordinate check? GPS reading?" "Calhoun, you passed me heading north. I thought you were returning to your depot." "South." Heading south. Confirmed. But I'd just watched him pass me going north. I was certain of it. Unless my sense of direction was wrong. Unless I was the one who was confused about which way was which. I checked my GPS. It showed me on Route 127, heading north toward Las Vegas, exactly where I should be. The mile markers confirmed it. The road signs confirmed it. But Jude Calhoun's tanker had been heading in the same direction I was, and he'd insisted he was going south. One of us was wrong about our direction, and I was no longer certain it wasn't me. The highway continued, empty and dark, with no other traffic visible. I drove in silence, the only sounds the rumble of my engine and the steady hum of the refrigeration unit. My GPS still showed 142 miles to Las Vegas. My clocks still showed impossible times. And somewhere ahead of me in the darkness, Jude Calhoun's tanker continued on a route that didn't match what either of us believed we were driving. I had 142 miles left to go. Or I'd already driven them. Or I was somehow stuck driving the same miles over and over, caught in a loop I couldn't perceive. The desert held no answers. It just stretched endlessly in all directions, dark and vast and indifferent to my confusion. I kept driving, because that's all I could do. Keep moving forward, or what I thought was forward, through a night that had stopped making sense somewhere around mile marker 108. The pharmaceutical cargo needed to reach Las Vegas by 6 a.m. I had a job to complete, a contract to fulfill, but as I watched the unchanging numbers on my GPS and the impossible times on my clocks, I began to wonder if I'd ever actually reach my destination, or if I was already there, somehow, driving through a version of Route 127 that existed outside normal space and time, where distance and duration had become meaningless measurements. The mile markers kept counting upward. The road kept passing beneath my wheels. But nothing was actually changing, and I had no idea how to make it stop. I drove for what felt like another hour, though my clocks refused to confirm it. The dashboard display cycled through times that made no sense. 12:47 a.m., then 11:23 p.m., then 1:04 a.m. My phone had stopped updating entirely, frozen at 12:04. Even my wristwatch, a mechanical piece I'd owned for 20 years, seemed to be running backward and forward in irregular intervals. The only constant was the mile markers. They progressed steadily, 163, 164, 165. Physical proof that I was actually moving, actually covering distance, even if every other measurement insisted otherwise. At mile marker 178, I spotted something that made me ease off the accelerator. Lights ahead, off to the right side of the highway. Not the floating, sourceless lights I'd seen earlier, but the familiar glow of a gas station, the kind of truck-friendly facility I'd been hoping to find, with multiple pumps and what looked like a small convenience store. I didn't remember a station at this location, but after everything else I'd experienced tonight, my memory felt unreliable. Maybe there'd always been a station here, and I'd simply never needed to stop. The Mojave had scattered services along its highways, some barely marked, easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. As I got closer, I could make out more details. The station was old style, with an analog price board and overhead canopy lighting. A single car was parked near the building, but I couldn't see anyone around it. The whole place had a functional but dated appearance, like it had been built in the 70s and never updated. I considered driving past. My fuel gauge still showed full, despite the miles I'd covered, but something about the station pulled at me. Maybe just the basic human need for contact with something solid and real after hours of navigating increasingly surreal circumstances. I pulled off the highway and into the station lot. As I rolled to a stop near the diesel pumps, I noticed the price board showing rates that seemed impossibly low, $2.37 per gallon. Those were prices from 15 years ago, not current rates. The station door opened and a woman stepped out. She was maybe 60, wearing a faded work shirt and jeans, moving with the unhurried pace of someone who'd been working night shifts for decades. She walked toward my truck with a practiced smile. I climbed down from the cab and nodded a greeting. Didn't know there was a station at this location. Been here 40 years, she replied. Most folks miss us. We're not on the GPS systems yet. She glanced at my trailer. Need fuel or just a break? Just checking in, really, making a run to Vegas, and the night's been strange. Something flickered in her expression. Not quite recognition, but acknowledgement. Strange how? I hesitated, unsure how much to say. Time's not tracking right. Distance either. My GPS says I've got 142 miles to Vegas, but I've been driving for hours and the number won't change. She nodded slowly, as if this made perfect sense. You're not the first to mention that. Happens sometimes out here, especially at night. The desert plays tricks. What kind of tricks? The kind where the usual rules don't quite apply. She gestured toward the station building. Come inside if you want. Coffee's fresh, more or less. You look like you could use a few minutes off the road. I followed her into the building, partly out of curiosity and partly because she seemed like someone who might actually understand what I was experiencing. The interior was clean but dated, with a small convenience store section and a counter with a coffee maker and register. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a flat, even glow. A name tag on her shirt read Opal. No last name, just the single word in faded letters. She poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if I wanted one, then leaned against the counter. So, you got the fuel rendezvous call. Mobile refueling in the middle of nowhere. I stared at her. How did you know about that? Because everyone who stops here tonight has the same story. Urgent cargo, fuel supply problems, meet a tanker at specific coordinates, and afterward, time stops making sense. She sipped her coffee. You're the 4th one this week. 4th what? 4th driver? 4th driver running the route tonight. All of you hauling different cargo, all of you with the same GPS problem. 142 miles to Vegas that never gets any closer. I set down my coffee cup, my mind racing. There are other drivers out here experiencing the same thing? At least 3 others, maybe more. They all stop here eventually, looking for answers or at least confirmation that they're not losing their minds. She paused. What time does your dashboard say it is? It keeps changing. Right now it says 1:47 a.m., but 5 minutes ago it said 11:30 p.m. And your cargo? Pharmaceuticals. Temperature critical. Has to reach Vegas by 6 a.m. Opal nodded again. That same knowing expression. They'll reach Vegas. You all will. The question is when you'll reach it, and whether the time that passes for you matches the time that passes everywhere else. You're not making sense. I know, but out here sense is a flexible concept. She walked to the window and looked out at the dark highway. This stretch of road, between mile markers 108 and 203, it doesn't follow normal rules during certain nights. Time stretches or compresses. Distance becomes relative. The usual measurements stop working. Why? I don't know why, I just know it happens. Been watching it happen for 15 years, ever since they started running those special convoys through here. What special convoys? She turned back to face me. The ones they don't talk about. The ones that move through the desert at night on routes that officially don't exist. You met one of the tanker drivers tonight. Jude Calhoun. You know him? He stops here sometimes. Him and about a dozen other drivers who run supplies for those convoys. Fuel, water, parts, support operations for trucks moving cargo that someone doesn't want tracked through normal channels. I thought about Calhoun's confusion, when his phone showed the wrong time. He seemed as confused as I am about what's happening, because he is. The support drivers aren't told what's really going on. They just get coordinates and schedules and payment. Most of them never notice the time problems because they're only in the affected zone for short periods. But you, hauling cargo all the way through it, you're getting the full experience. What is the full experience? Opal refilled her coffee cup. Best I can figure, you're driving through the same stretch of road multiple times without realizing it. Not a loop exactly, more like the road is folded somehow, layered. You cover the distance, but you also don't cover it. You're here and not here simultaneously. That's impossible. And yet here you are, with clocks that won't track properly and a GPS that won't decrease. What's impossible is just what hasn't been explained yet. She paused. The other drivers who stopped here tonight, they're all still on the same road you're on. All of you moving toward Vegas, all of you stuck in this stretched out section of highway that doesn't want to let you reach the end. I tried to process what she was saying. How do I get out of it? You keep driving. Eventually, the road releases you. You'll reach Vegas, make your delivery, and when you check your logs afterward, everything will show normal transit time. But your memory will tell you different. You'll remember hours or days that didn't happen according to the official record. Has anyone ever not made it out? Her expression darkened slightly. A few. Drivers who panicked, who stopped and refused to keep moving. The road doesn't like that. Doesn't like vehicles sitting still in the stretched section. Those trucks eventually get found, but the drivers... She trailed off. What about the drivers? They're gone. No bodies, no evidence of what happened. Just empty trucks with full fuel tanks and cargo still secured. As if the drivers simply stepped out and walked away into the desert. I felt a chill despite the warm coffee. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know. You need to understand that the only way through is forward. Don't stop. Don't turn around. Don't leave your truck until you're completely out of the affected zone. Just keep driving. Even when nothing makes sense, how will I know when I'm out? Your GPS will start counting down. Your clocks will stabilize. You'll feel it. Like pressure releasing, like stepping from one room into another. She met my eyes. And whatever you do, don't try to contact anyone while you're in here. The phone signals get strange. Messages don't reach who they're supposed to reach. You might end up talking to someone you shouldn't be able to talk to. Like who? Like yourself, from different points along the route, or other drivers who are caught in different folds of the same road. Communication gets crossed up, tangled. Best to just maintain radio silence until you're clear. I wanted to dismiss what she was saying as nonsense, but everything I'd experienced tonight supported her explanation, impossible as it seemed. The repeating landmarks, the non-decreasing GPS distance, the time anomalies, all of it fit with the idea that this stretch of highway existed in some kind of distorted state. Why does this happen? I asked. What causes it? The convoys, maybe, or whatever they're carrying. Some kind of effect that bleeds over into the normal traffic, warping the space around it. She shrugged. Or maybe the desert just does this sometimes, and the convoys learn to use it. I stopped trying to figure out the why years ago. Now I just help drivers understand the what. What about you? If this section of road is so strange, why do you work here? Because someone needs to. Because drivers need a place to stop and confirm they're not crazy before they keep going. And because... She paused, looking out at the dark highway again. Because I can't leave. I tried, years ago. Closed up the station, got in my car, drove west toward California. Ended up back here 3 hours later, my odometer showing I'd driven 200 miles, but there I was, in the same parking lot. You're trapped here? Not trapped, anchored. This place, this station, it's fixed in a way the rest of the road isn't. So I stay, and I help drivers when I can, and I watch the convoys pass through in the night carrying cargo I'll never know about. I looked around the dated interior of the station, seeing it differently now. A way station in a zone where normal rules didn't apply. A fixed point in distorted space. The car outside, I said. Is that yours? Belonged to a driver who stopped here in 2018. He went outside to check his trailer and never came back. Truck's been towed away, but the car's still here. I keep hoping he'll walk out of the desert one day and need it. The casual way she said it made it somehow more disturbing than if she'd been dramatic about it. I finished my coffee and stood. I should keep moving. I've got a delivery to make. You do, and you'll make it, as long as you don't stop again until you're out. She walked me to the door. When you reach Vegas, when everything's back to normal, you won't find this station if you come looking for it. It's only here during the stretches. The rest of the time, there's just empty desert at this mile marker. How do I know any of this was real? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You don't. Maybe I'm just a hallucination you're having from road fatigue. Maybe this whole night is, but you'll still reach Vegas with your cargo intact, and that's what matters. I walked back to my truck, climbed into the cab, and started the engine. In my mirrors, I watched Opal standing in the doorway of the station, a fixed point in the darkness. Then I pulled back onto Route 127 and continued north. The GPS still showed 142 miles to Vegas. My clock still displayed impossible times, but now I understood, or at least I understood that understanding wasn't possible. I just needed to keep driving. At mile marker 187, I passed Jude Calhoun's tanker going in the opposite direction. Or maybe it was going in the same direction, and I was the one whose sense of orientation was inverted. He flashed his lights at me and I flashed back. Two drivers acknowledging each other in the strangeness. At mile marker 194, I saw another refrigerated truck ahead of me. Same general type as mine, hauling cargo that needed climate control. I pulled closer, trying to see the company markings, and felt my stomach drop when I recognized them. It was my company, my truck number. I was following my own truck. I slowed down, letting the distance between us increase, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Then the truck ahead disappeared around a curve, and when I followed, it was gone. No turnoff, no place it could have gone, just empty highway. At mile marker 201, my CB radio crackled to life with a voice I recognized as my own. This is Wendell Croy hauling pharmaceuticals, checking in at mile marker 108, everything running smooth, making good time. Mile marker 108, the point where everything had started going wrong. But I was at mile marker 201, and I was definitely not making that transmission. I didn't respond. As Opal had warned, communication in this zone was tangled, crossed with different versions of the same route. At mile marker 203, something changed. I felt it before I saw it in the instruments, a subtle shift like pressure equalizing. My GPS flickered, and when it stabilized, it showed 94 miles to Las Vegas. The number was decreasing. I drove another mile and checked again, 93 miles, another mile, 92 miles. My dashboard clock stabilized at 3:47 a.m. My phone came back to life with a cascade of delayed notifications, timestamps jumping forward to match the dashboard. I was out of whatever that stretched zone had been, back into normal space where distance and time behaved predictably. The relief was immediate and intense. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and allowed myself to relax slightly. Whatever I'd driven through, I'd made it to the other side. The rest of the drive to Las Vegas was completely normal. Traffic increased as I approached the city, other trucks and early morning commuters sharing the highway. The mile markers counted down predictably. My GPS tracked correctly. My clocks all showed the same time. I reached the pharmaceutical distributor's warehouse at 5:23 a.m., well ahead of the 6 deadline. The cargo temperature had held perfectly at 39 degrees throughout the entire journey. The receiving dock worker checked everything, signed off on the delivery, and thanked me for making good time. "Any problems on the route?" he asked, making small talk while his crew unloaded the trailer. "No problems," I said, because what else could I say? I checked my trip computer before leaving the warehouse. It showed I'd driven 304 miles from Barstow to Las Vegas. The elapsed time showed 5 hours and 40 minutes. Everything was within normal parameters. But my memory held something different. I remembered hours of driving through repeated sections of highway, watching unchanging GPS distances, experiencing time that flowed in irregular patterns. I remembered Opal in her station, warning me about drivers who'd vanished. I remembered following my own truck. I drove to a truck stop in Vegas and parked, needing sleep but knowing it wouldn't come easily. I pulled up my phone's map application and searched for fuel stations along Route 127 at the location where I'd met Opal. No results, no station listed at that mile marker. Just empty desert, according to the map. I tried searching for the station name, for Opal's name, for any reference to a truck stop at that location. Nothing. As she'd said, it was only there during the stretches, whatever that meant. I thought about calling dispatch to report the unusual experience, but what would I say? That I'd driven through a zone where distance and time didn't work properly? That I'd gotten fuel from a tanker driver who'd been equally confused? That I'd stopped at a station that didn't officially exist? They'd think I was having some kind of breakdown. They'd require medical evaluation, psychological screening. They might suspend my license while they investigated. Better to say nothing, to file the standard trip report showing normal transit times and no incidents. But I couldn't shake the memory of what I'd experienced. And I couldn't stop thinking about the other drivers Opal had mentioned, the ones who'd stopped before reaching the end of the stretched zone. The ones whose empty trucks had been found, but whose bodies had never been recovered. What had happened to them? Where had they gone? I tried to sleep, but managed only a few hours of restless dozing. My dreams were full of endless highways and unchanging distances, of following my own taillights into infinite darkness. When I woke, it was early afternoon. I had a message from dispatch asking if I was available for a return haul to California. Standard work, normal route, good pay. I accepted it without hesitation. Whatever I'd experienced on Route 127, I needed to prove to myself that I could still do the job normally. That the strange night hadn't broken something fundamental in my ability to navigate and trust my instruments. The return trip was completely unremarkable. I hauled agricultural equipment from Las Vegas to Bakersfield, taking Interstate 15 south and avoiding Route 127 entirely. The drive was boring and predictable, and exactly what I needed. But as I drove, I found myself checking my mirrors more frequently than usual, looking for tanker trucks that shouldn't be there, for my own vehicle somehow following me, for any sign that the strangeness was continuing. I saw nothing unusual, just normal traffic on a normal highway. When I reached Bakersfield and completed the delivery, I felt something close to relief. Whatever I'd driven through on Route 127, it had been contained to that one night, that one stretch of road. It wasn't following me. It wasn't spreading. I had survived it, and I could move on. But that night, parked at a truck stop and checking my route for the next day's haul, I found myself pulling up a map of Route 127, zooming in on the section between mile markers 108 and 203. looking for any indication of what might be different about that stretch of highway. The map showed nothing unusual, just a road through the desert, straight and unremarkable. But I knew better. I knew that during certain nights, for reasons I didn't understand, that road stopped being normal. It stretched and folded and trapped drivers in recursive loops where time and distance became meaningless. And somewhere along that route, there was a gas station that didn't exist except when it was needed, run by a woman named Opal who'd been there for 15 years, watching the convoys pass and helping confused drivers understand that they weren't crazy. Or maybe I'd hallucinated the whole thing. Maybe road fatigue and stress had created false memories of impossible events. But my trip computer told a different story. It showed that I'd driven 304 miles in under 6 hours, which was a perfectly normal time. But my memory insisted I'd been driving for much longer, through hours that the clocks refused to acknowledge. Someone was right, either my memory or the official record. But they couldn't both be true. I closed the map application and tried to sleep. Tomorrow I had another load, another route, another chance to prove that I was still a reliable driver who could be trusted with valuable cargo. But I knew I'd never take a run on Route 127 again if I could avoid it. Some roads, I'd learned, were best left to others. Some roads didn't want you to reach the end. And some roads held their travelers in loops you might never escape, driving the same miles forever, while thinking you were making progress. I'd been lucky. I'd kept moving, as Opal had advised. I'd reached the end and escaped back into normal space. But I couldn't stop thinking about the drivers who hadn't been so lucky, who'd stopped in the stretched zone and never moved again. Were they still there somehow? Still trapped in their trucks at various points along Route 127, experiencing time that didn't flow normally, unable to reach the end. I didn't want to know the answer. I just wanted to drive normal roads, with normal distances, on normal nights where the GPS worked properly and time passed at the expected rate. But I knew I'd never completely forget what I'd experienced. The memory of that night would stay with me. A reminder that sometimes the roads we travel hold secrets we're not meant to understand. And sometimes the desert doesn't let go. I stayed away from Route 127 for 6 weeks. My dispatcher never questioned it when I requested routes that kept me in California or sent me east toward Arizona instead of north through Nevada. There were plenty of loads that didn't require crossing the Mojave at night, and I made sure those were the only assignments I accepted. But the memory of that night wouldn't fade. If anything, it grew sharper with time, more detailed, more insistent. I could still see Opal's face in the fluorescent light of that impossible gas station. Could still feel the wrongness of watching my GPS distance refuse to change. Could still hear my own voice on the CB radio, calling from a mile marker I'd passed hours before. Normal routes felt hollow after that. I'd drive through the night on perfectly ordinary highways, and part of my mind would be elsewhere, wondering what was happening on Route 127. Wondering if other drivers were experiencing what I'd experienced. Wondering about the ones who hadn't made it out. It was a trucker from Nevada who finally brought it up directly. His name was Dale Trammell, and I met him at a truck stop outside Reno. We'd crossed paths a few times over the years, the way drivers do on overlapping routes. He was reliable, experienced, not the type to exaggerate or tell tall tales. We were both grabbing coffee when he nodded toward my rig in the parking lot. "You still running pharmaceuticals?" he asked. "When the loads come up, why?" "Because I just turned down a pharma run that would have taken me through the Mojave on Route 127. Night delivery, same setup you usually handle." He sipped his coffee. Dispatch seemed surprised when I said no. Told them I don't run that route anymore. Something in his tone made me pay attention. Something happened on 127. He studied me for a moment, as if deciding how much to say. You ever have a run where the GPS stopped making sense? Where you drove for hours but the distance to your destination never changed? My heart rate picked up. Yeah, I have. Dale nodded slowly. Thought so. You had that look when I mentioned the route. Same look I see in the mirror when I think about it. He gestured toward an empty booth. Got time to compare notes? We sat, and he told his story. It matched mine in almost every detail. Late-night cargo, mobile fuel rendezvous, time anomalies, repeated landmarks. He'd driven through the same stretched section of Route 127, experienced the same impossible conditions. Did you stop at a gas station? I asked. Old-style place? Woman named Opal running it? His eyes widened. You saw her too? She told me I was the fourth driver that week experiencing the same thing. She told me I was the third, but that was 2 months ago. Dale pulled out a small notebook. I've been documenting everything I can find out about Route 127, trying to make sense of it. What have you found? Not much that helps. The route's been there for decades. Normal highway maintenance records. No official incidents beyond standard accidents and breakdowns. But when you dig into trucker forums and talk to other drivers off the record, there's a pattern. He showed me the notebook. It contained dates, driver names, brief descriptions of experiences. I recognized some of the names from CB chatter over the years. Experienced, reliable drivers who'd suddenly stopped taking certain routes or had left the industry entirely. How many? I asked. At least 20 cases I can confirm in the past 5 years. Probably more who won't talk about it. All of them had similar experiences on Route 127 during night runs. Time problems, distance problems, repeated landmarks. Some saw Opal's station, others didn't, but reported other impossible things. Like what? Following their own trucks, hearing their own voices on the radio from different points in time, passing the same rest area multiple times without turning around. He paused. And then there are the ones who didn't make it out. I felt that chill again. The same one I'd felt when Opal had told me about empty trucks and missing drivers. How many missing? 4 that I can document. Trucks found abandoned on Route 127, engines running, cargo intact, drivers gone. No bodies, no evidence of foul play, no explanation. The official reports call them voluntary abandonments. Assume the drivers walked away for personal reasons. But I've talked to families. These weren't people with problems or reasons to disappear. They were experienced drivers on routine runs who just vanished. He flipped to a page with 4 names written in careful print. Marcus Holt. September 2019, Patricia Klein. March 2020. David Kemper. July 2021. Rosa Delgado. January 2023. I've been trying to find connections between them, Dale continued. They all ran Route 127 at night. They all had cargo that required specific delivery windows. And based on the last radio transmissions from 3 of them, they were all experiencing the same anomalies we did. What about the 4th? Rosa Delgado. No radio transmission. Her truck was found at mile marker 176 with a note on the dash that just said, "I can't keep driving the same miles." Her family said she'd been acting strange after a previous run on 127, talking about time not working right and seeing things that shouldn't be there. I thought about Opal's warning. Drivers who stopped in the stretched zone. Drivers who refused to keep moving. Opal told me the road doesn't like vehicles that stop and sit still. You believe her? Believe that the road itself has some kind of consciousness or purpose. I don't know what I believe, but I know what I experienced, and it wasn't normal. Something about that stretch of highway doesn't follow regular physics. Dale closed his notebook. "I've been trying to get someone official to investigate. Transportation Department, Highway Patrol, even the FBI. Nobody's interested. The official position is that these are isolated incidents with mundane explanations. Drivers abandoning their trucks for personal reasons, time-tracking errors due to GPS glitches, that sort of thing. But you don't buy it. I can't buy it, because I was there. I felt what it's like to drive through that zone. And I saw things I can't explain with mundane reasoning." He met my eyes. "The question is, what do we do about it? What can we do? We can't prove any of it. Our trip computers show normal times. Our GPS data shows normal routes. Even our fuel receipts show timestamps that don't match our memories. But there are enough of us now, enough drivers who've experienced it. If we could get them all to come forward together, make a coordinated statement, maybe someone would have to take it seriously." I wanted to believe that would work. But I thought about my conversation with dispatch after that night, how they'd shown no record of authorizing my route through 127. I thought about how quickly the official records had diverged from reality. "Someone's already covering this up," I said. "The fuel supply problems that forced the mobile refueling, my dispatcher had no record of that call. The special authorization didn't exist according to official channels. Whoever's running those convoys through 127, they've got enough pull to manipulate records and make evidence disappear. Or the road itself is doing that somehow, changing what gets recorded, what gets remembered, what leaves physical evidence." The idea was disturbing on a fundamental level. A stretch of highway that could alter reality around it, that could trap drivers in recursive loops and erase official documentation of what happened there. "Have you tried going back?" I asked. "Driving through 127 during the day to see if anything's different?" "Twice. Both times, completely normal. Standard highway, standard landmarks. Everything makes sense. Whatever causes the stretched zone, it only happens at night, or only happens during certain nights. The nights when the convoys are running." Dale nodded. "That's my theory. Whatever those trucks are carrying, it creates some kind of field effect that distorts space and time around them. Normal traffic gets caught in the distortion, experiences the anomalies. But by morning, when the convoys are gone, everything returns to normal." "What could create that kind of effect?" "I don't know. I'm a trucker, not a physicist, but I've been reading about theoretical stuff, experimental technologies, quantum effects, that sort of thing. There's research into exotic matter that could theoretically warp space-time. Maybe someone's figured out how to do it practically, and they're using Route 127 as a test corridor." It sounded like science fiction. But then, everything I'd experienced that night had felt like science fiction. "If that's true," I said, "then the missing drivers might not be dead. They might be trapped somehow in the distortion, stuck in a fold of the road that never resolves back to normal." Dale's expression was grim. "I've thought about that. It might actually be worse than death. Imagine being caught in that stretched zone permanently, driving the same miles over and over. Your clock's never advancing, your GPS never decreasing. No way to reach the end, no way to escape." The thought made my skin crawl. I'd experienced just a few hours of that disorientation, and it had been deeply disturbing. Days or weeks of it would be maddening. Years would be incomprehensible. "We have to do something," I said. "We can't just let this keep happening. What do you suggest?" "We find more drivers, build a bigger network of people who've experienced this, document everything we can, and then we figure out who's running those convoys and force them to acknowledge what's happening." Dale looked skeptical. "That's dangerous. If there's a deliberate cover-up, if someone's manipulating records and making official reports disappear, They're not going to appreciate drivers poking around. I know. But what's the alternative? Keep driving our routes, avoiding Route 127, and hoping it doesn't spread to other highways. Those missing drivers were real people with families. They deserve better than being written off as voluntary abandonments. All right, Dale said finally. I'm in, but we need to be careful about this. Use secure communication. Don't leave obvious digital trails. Don't trust that official channels will help us. Over the next month, Dale and I quietly reached out to other drivers we thought might have experienced something on Route 127. We used CB radio codes and truck stop meetings, avoiding phones and emails that could be monitored. It was slow, careful work, but gradually we built a network of 7 drivers willing to talk about their experiences. Every story had the same core elements. Night runs on Route 127. Time anomalies, distance that wouldn't decrease, repeated landmarks, and the sense that something was fundamentally wrong with that stretch of highway during certain nights. 3 of them had stopped at Opal Station. They all described her the same way. Older woman, calm demeanor, seems to understand what's happening. And they all confirmed that the station didn't exist when they tried to find it again during daylight hours. One driver, a woman named Ellen Carver, had something none of the rest of us had thought to check. She'd photographed her instrument panel during the anomalies, trying to document the impossible GPS readings and time displays. When she showed us the photos, they were normal. Standard instrument panel, reasonable times, GPS showing distances that made sense. The anomalies she'd witnessed and documented weren't captured in the images. It's like the road won't let itself be proven, she said. Everything that would serve as evidence gets altered or erased or just doesn't show up in recordings. Dale had a different explanation. Or the distortion affects recording equipment differently than human perception. We experience the stretched time, but devices record what's really happening from an outside perspective. Either way, it meant we had no hard evidence. Just testimony from a handful of truckers claiming impossible experiences on a highway that looked completely normal in daylight. Then, in the 6th week after my initial night on Route 127, something changed. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was male, professional, controlled. Wendell Croy? My name is Agent Hassler. I'm with a federal task force investigating anomalous phenomena on certain transportation corridors. I understand you've had unusual experiences on Route 127 in Nevada. My first instinct was to deny everything, but something about his tone suggested he already knew. Who told you that? We've been monitoring communication patterns among commercial drivers. Your name came up in connection with several others who've reported similar incidents. I'd like to meet with you to discuss what you've experienced. What task force? Which agency? That's sensitive information. But I can tell you that your experiences are being taken seriously at the federal level, and we'd appreciate your cooperation in understanding what's happening on that highway. It could be legitimate, or it could be whoever was running the convoys, trying to identify and silence drivers who'd seen too much. I need to think about it, I said. Of course. But Mr. Croy, I should mention that we're also concerned for driver safety. 4 individuals have vanished on Route 127 in the past few years. We'd like to prevent that number from increasing. Your information could help us do that. He left a callback number and ended the call. I immediately contacted Dale and the other drivers in our network, warning them about the contact. Within hours, 3 of them reported receiving similar calls from the same agent. We debated what to do. Meet with this federal task force and risk walking into a trap? Or refuse and continue trying to investigate on our own? The decision was made for us when Ellen Carver called with disturbing news. She'd accepted a load that would take her through Route 127 at night, thinking she'd be safe since she knew what to expect. But she'd never reached her destination. Her truck had been found abandoned at mile marker 189, engine running, cargo intact. No sign of Ellen. She was the fifth missing driver. And she'd been part of our network, actively investigating what was happening on Route 127. The implication was clear. Either the road had claimed another victim, or someone had decided that Ellen knew too much. I called Agent Hassler's number. He answered on the first ring. "Mr. Croy, have you made a decision?" Ellen Carver is gone. She was investigating Route 127, and now she's the latest driver to vanish. If your task force is real, you need to find her. And you need to shut down whatever's happening on that highway before more people disappear. I understand your concern, but we need your cooperation to do that effectively. Will you meet with us? On one condition, I bring others with me. The drivers who've experienced the same things, safety in numbers. There was a pause. Acceptable. We can arrange a meeting location in Las Vegas, secure facility, neutral ground. I'll send you the details. After the call ended, I sat in my truck feeling like I'd just agreed to something I'd regret. But Ellen was gone, and 4 others before her. If this federal task force was real and could actually help, it might be the only chance we had of understanding what was happening and preventing more disappearances. If it wasn't real, then I was about to walk into whatever trap had been set for drivers who asked too many questions. Dale was skeptical when I told him about the arrangement. This could be exactly what they want, getting all of us in one place where we can be dealt with efficiently. It could be, but what's our alternative? Ellen's gone. We keep investigating on our own, and maybe more of us disappear. Or we stop investigating entirely and just accept that Route 127 is off limits. Neither of those options is good. No. But at least meeting with this task force gives us a chance of getting answers. Or confirming that there's an active cover-up, which is information in itself. 4 of us agreed to attend the meeting. Me, Dale, a driver named Kirk Stevens, and a woman named Mara Finch. The others in our network declined, too spooked by Ellen's disappearance to risk exposing themselves further. The meeting was set for 3 days later, at a facility in the industrial section of Las Vegas. As I drove toward Nevada, taking Interstate 15 to avoid Route 127 entirely, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a terrible mistake. But Ellen deserved better than being forgotten as another voluntary abandonment. And if there was even a chance that this federal task force could explain what was happening on Route 127, I had to take it. The facility turned out to be a nondescript warehouse building with government plates on the vehicles parked outside. Agent Hassler met us at the entrance. Tall, fit, probably mid-40s, with the bearing of someone used to authority. He led us to a conference room and introduced us to 2 other individuals who didn't offer names or agencies. They just sat and listened as Hassler asked us to recount our experiences on Route 127. We told him everything. The time anomalies, the distance problems, the repeated landmarks, Opal's station. He took notes and asked detailed questions, but didn't seem surprised by anything we described. When we finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he closed his notebook and looked at each of us in turn. What you experienced on Route 127 is real. The time distortion, the spatial anomalies, the difficulties with measurement and recording. It's all documented and under investigation. What's causing it? Dale asked. That's classified. But I can tell you that certain experimental technologies are being tested on isolated transportation corridors. Route 127 was selected because of its low traffic volume and remote location. The effects you experienced are side effects of that testing. Side effects that have killed 5 drivers. We don't know that they're dead. They're missing, which is different. And yes, we're concerned about the civilian impact, which is why we're working to contain the phenomenon and prevent further incidents. Contain it how? I asked. By continuing to run the tests and just hoping fewer people get caught in the distortion. By understanding the parameters better so we can predict when and where the effects will manifest. And eventually, by completing the testing so the technology can be properly deployed under controlled conditions. What technology? What are you testing? Hassler shook his head. That's above your clearance level. What I can tell you is that you need to stop investigating Route 127. Your curiosity is understandable, but it's putting you at risk. The phenomenon is sensitive to attention and observation. The more you focus on it, the more likely you are to get caught in it. That doesn't make sense, Mara said. How can a road distortion be sensitive to attention? Because it's not just a road distortion, it's... Hassler paused, choosing his words carefully. Think of it as a field effect that responds to consciousness. When you're aware of it, when you're looking for it, you become more susceptible to it. That's why drivers who don't know about the anomalies often pass through without incident, while those who are watching for them get trapped. The explanation felt incomplete, like he was describing something complex in deliberately simplified terms, but it also had a disturbing logic to it. What about Ellen Carver? Dale asked. She knew about the anomalies, was watching for them, and she disappeared. Are you saying her attention caused that? Possibly, or she encountered a particularly strong manifestation. We're still investigating. Hassler leaned forward. Here's what I need from all of you. Stop researching Route 127. Stop comparing notes with other drivers. Stop trying to document or understand what you experienced. The more you engage with it, the more danger you're in. And if we don't agree to that, I asked, then you're on your own. We can't protect people who insist on investigating classified phenomena. And I'll be honest with you, your continued attention to this matter could interfere with the testing in ways that create more danger, not less. It was a threat dressed up as concern. Stop asking questions or face consequences. We left the meeting with more questions than answers. Hassler's explanation raised as many issues as it resolved. What kind of technology created consciousness-sensitive distortions in space-time? Who had authorized testing it on a public highway? And what had really happened to the missing drivers? In the parking lot, the four of us stood by our trucks and discussed what we'd learned. He's lying, Mara said flatly. Or at least not telling us the full truth. This isn't just about testing technology. There's something else happening. But he confirmed the phenomenon is real, Kirk pointed out. That's more than we had before. At least now we know we're not crazy. We knew that already. What we don't know is whether we can trust anything he told us, or whether that meeting just put us on a list of problems to be dealt with. Dale looked at me. What do you think, Wendell? You're the one who set this up. I thought about Ellen, about the four others who'd vanished before her, about Opal's warning that drivers who stopped moving in the stretched zone were never seen again. I think we need to be very careful about what we do next, I said finally. But I also think we can't just stop investigating, not when people are still disappearing. The question was how to investigate when the phenomenon itself seemed designed to trap those who looked too closely at it, and whether any of us would survive finding the answer. Against Agent Hassler's warning, we kept investigating. Not openly, not in ways that would draw attention, but we couldn't just walk away. Ellen Carver had been one of us, and she'd vanished trying to understand what we'd all experienced. That demanded something more than silence. Dale found the pattern 3 weeks after our meeting with the task force. He'd been analyzing delivery schedules, fuel records, and highway patrol reports, looking for correlations between convoy activity and the timing of anomalous events on Route 127. It's every 19 days, he told me over a secure phone line. Like clockwork, the stretched zone activates for approximately 8 hours during the night, then returns to normal. The convoys run during those windows. How far back does the pattern go? At least 3 years. Probably longer, but records get harder to verify the further back I look. And here's the interesting part. The 5 missing drivers all disappeared during active windows. They weren't random encounters with the anomaly. They were there when the distortion was at full strength. So was I. So were you. We made it out. Because we kept moving. Remember what Opal said? The road doesn't like vehicles that stop. The missing drivers all stopped for extended periods. Rosa Delgado's truck was found with a note saying she couldn't keep driving the same miles. That suggests she'd been caught in the loop for a while before she gave up. The thought sent a chill through me. How long is a while when time doesn't flow normally? That's the question nobody can answer. From an outside perspective, she might have been stopped for 20 minutes, but inside the distortion, experiencing subjective time, could have been hours. Days longer. I thought about the hours I'd spent driving through that stretched section, watching my GPS refuse to count down, seeing the same landmarks repeat. It had felt endless, even though it was probably only a few hours of real time. The psychological strain of experiencing that for days or weeks would be unbearable. We need to find out what happened to them, I said. Not just document that they vanished, but actually locate where they went. And how do you propose we do that? We can't exactly search a section of highway that only exists in a distorted state during specific nights. But an idea was forming. What if we do exactly that? Enter the stretched zone during an active window and search for evidence of the missing drivers. If they're trapped in there somehow, caught in loops that never resolve back to normal, maybe we can find them. Wendell, that's insane. You want to deliberately enter the phenomenon that's already claimed 5 people? We'd be prepared, we'd know what to expect, and we'd keep moving, like Opal said. No stopping for extended periods. You're talking about driving into a space-time distortion that responds to consciousness and observation, that seems to trap people who pay too much attention to it, and you think we'll be safe because we know the rules. That's not preparation, that's overconfidence. He had a point, but the alternative was accepting that Ellen and the others were simply gone, with no explanation and no hope of recovery. Then at least help me figure out when the next window opens. If I'm going to do this, I need to time it right. Dale was silent for a long moment. You're really going to do this? Yes. Then I'm coming with you. If you're going to be stupid and suicidal about this, you shouldn't do it alone. 4 days later, on a night when Dale's calculations predicted an active window on Route 127, we met at a truck stop in Barstow. We'd both arranged light loads that could be legitimately delivered to Las Vegas, giving us plausible reasons for being on the route. No special authorizations this time, no mobile fuel rendezvous, just 2 drivers making normal runs through the Mojave. Except we'd be deliberately entering the stretched zone and looking for signs of the missing drivers. We coordinated our departure times to enter the anomalous section simultaneously from different points, maintaining CB radio contact. The plan was simple. Drive through the zone normally, document anything unusual, and whatever happened, keep moving until we reached the other side. I left Barstow at 10:30 p.m., heading north on Route 127. The night was clear and cool, with excellent visibility. Traffic was light, a few passenger vehicles, the occasional long-haul trucker. Everything completely normal. At mile marker 105, I radioed Dale. Approaching the boundary. You reading anything unusual yet? Negative. GPS tracking normal, clock synchronized. Maybe tonight's not an active window. But at mile marker 1008, I felt it. That subtle shift, like pressure changing. My GPS flickered, and when it stabilized, it showed 147 miles to Las Vegas, a number that wouldn't change for the next several hours. "I'm in," I told Dale. "Time just went sideways. What's your status?" "Same. Just crossed into it from the north. GPS is locked at 89 miles to Barstow. That doesn't make sense with my actual position." "Nothing in here makes sense. Remember, keep moving, document what we see, get to the other side." "Copy that. Stay safe, Wendell." I drove through the familiar strangeness, watching mile markers progress, while my GPS distance remained frozen. At mile marker 121, I passed a rest area I'd seen before during my first experience in the zone. I slowed, but didn't stop, scanning the parking area for any sign of abandoned vehicles. Empty, just dark pavement and a closed restroom building. At mile marker 134, my CB crackled with a voice that made my blood run cold. "This is Ellen Carver hauling electronics to Vegas. If anyone can hear this, I'm stuck at mile marker 176. My GPS won't decrease and I've been driving for what feels like hours. Can someone confirm my position?" I grabbed the mic with shaking hands. "Ellen, this is Wendell Croy. Where are you?" Static, then her voice again. Exactly the same words. "This is Ellen Carver hauling electronics to Vegas. If anyone can hear this, I'm stuck at mile marker 176. It was a loop. A recorded message repeating endlessly, transmitted from somewhere in the distortion. Ellen's last radio call, still broadcasting even though she'd vanished weeks ago. "Dale, are you hearing this?" "Yeah." "Jesus, Wendell, that's her voice. That's definitely her." I drove faster, heading toward mile marker 176. If her radio transmission was still active in the zone, maybe she was still there somehow. Still trapped in the loop, still trying to call for help. At mile marker 163, I passed Opal's station. The lights were on, her car parked out front. I considered stopping, asking her if she knew anything about the missing drivers, but remembered the rule: keep moving. Through my windshield, I saw Opal standing in the doorway, watching my truck pass. She didn't wave, didn't signal, just watched with an expression I couldn't read from this distance. At mile marker 176, I found Ellen's truck. It was parked on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing exactly as the official report had described. But the report had said the truck was found empty. This truck wasn't empty. Ellen was in the driver's seat. I pulled onto the shoulder ahead of her truck and climbed down from my cab. Through her windshield, I could see her clearly, illuminated by my truck's lights. She was gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, her expression blank. I approached and knocked on her door. "Ellen, Ellen, can you hear me?" No response. She didn't move, didn't blink, didn't acknowledge my presence in any way. I tried the door handle. Locked. I knocked harder, shouted her name. Nothing. It was like she was frozen in time, caught in a single moment that had somehow become permanent. Or like she was still experiencing time, but at such a different rate that my minutes were her microseconds. My CB radio crackled with Dale's voice. "Wendell, I just passed mile marker 147 and saw something impossible. There's a truck ahead of me that looks exactly like yours. That can't be me. I'm stopped at 176 looking at Ellen's truck. Then whose truck am I following?" A chill ran down my spine. "Get a closer look at it. Tell me what you see." Several minutes of silence, then, "It's your truck, your company markings, your unit number. But you're not driving it. There's nobody in the cab. It's just moving on its own." The empty version of my truck. The ghost truck I'd followed during my first time through the zone. Except now Dale was seeing it too, confirming it wasn't just my imagination or perception. "Dale, get away from it. Don't follow it. Don't try to catch up to it. Already backing off, but Wendell, if that's your truck, then what are you driving? I looked back at my own rig, solid and real on the shoulder behind me. But was it? Or was I experiencing a version of myself that existed only in the distortion, while some other version of me was driving an empty truck through Dale's section of the loop? Ellen's voice came over the CB again. This is Ellen Carver hauling electronics to Vegas. If anyone can hear this, I'm stuck at mile marker 176. I looked at her, frozen in her cab, her mouth not moving even as her voice transmitted over the radio. The call was coming from some version of her that existed in a different fold of time, still trying to reach help, while this version of her was locked in a single instant. I climbed back into my truck, my hands shaking. This was worse than I'd imagined. The missing drivers weren't dead and they weren't wandering in the desert. They were here, caught in temporal loops, experiencing time at rates that didn't align with the outside world. Ellen had probably been driving for weeks or months from her perspective, but trapped in such a way that she'd never reach the end of the stretched section. Dale, we need to get out of here, now. Already moving, heading for the northern boundary. I pulled back onto the highway and accelerated, putting distance between myself and Ellen's frozen truck. But I couldn't stop thinking about her trapped there, aware but unable to move or communicate effectively, caught in a nightmare version of the same drive she'd been trying to complete. At mile marker 189, I passed another truck on the shoulder, then another at 194, both with drivers visible inside, both frozen in the same way Ellen had been. I recognized one of them from Dale's list, David Kemper, missing since July 2021. They were all here, all the missing drivers, trapped in various points along Route 127's stretched section. Not vanished, not dead, but caught in temporal distortions that prevented them from completing their routes or escaping back to normal space-time. Wendell, you need to see this. Dale's voice was strained. I'm at mile marker 118, and there are at least a dozen trucks parked along the shoulder. Different companies, different years. Some of them look old, like they've been here for a long time. 12 more missing drivers. People who'd vanished over the years, whose disappearances had been written off or forgotten, all of them still here in the distortion. At mile marker 203, I felt the pressure shift again. My GPS flickered and suddenly showed 94 miles to Las Vegas, counting down normally. My clocks synchronized. I was out of the stretch zone, back in normal space-time. I pulled over at the first rest area and waited for Dale to emerge from the southern boundary. When he arrived 20 minutes later, his face was pale. There are more, he said. So many more. Not just the 5 we knew about, dozens of trucks scattered through that zone, all with drivers frozen inside them. We have to report this. Get search and rescue teams in there, try to extract them somehow. And tell them what? That we found missing drivers in a space-time distortion that only exists during certain nights? That they're not dead, but caught in temporal loops? Dale shook his head. Nobody will believe us, and even if they did, how would they mount a rescue operation in a zone where time doesn't work properly? He was right. Any rescue team entering the distortion would risk becoming trapped themselves, and there was no guarantee that the frozen drivers could even be freed from their loops. They might be so far out of sync with normal time that they couldn't be brought back. We sat in silence for a long time, processing what we'd seen. Eventually, Dale spoke quietly. We should call Hassler, tell him what we found. Maybe his task force has resources we don't, ways to help those people. Or maybe they already know. Maybe they've always known and just haven't done anything about it. Then what's our option? Leave them there? I didn't have an answer for that. Over the next few days, we debated what to do with the information. We could go public, try to force an investigation through media attention, But without evidence, and our photos showed nothing unusual just as Ellen's hadn't, we'd be dismissed as conspiracy theorists or attention seekers. We could try another rescue attempt, going in better prepared with equipment and plans. But we'd barely made it out ourselves, and attempting to extract frozen drivers from temporal loops was beyond our capability. Or we could contact Hassler and hope that his task force would actually help. In the end, the decision was made for us. A week after our nighttime investigation, Dale's truck was found abandoned at mile marker 152 on Route 127. Engine running, cargo intact, no sign of the driver. He'd gone back alone without telling me, probably trying to help the trapped drivers, trying to find a way to free them. And the distortion had claimed him too. I called Hassler's number. It was disconnected. I tried the facility where we'd met with the task force. The building was empty, with "for lease" signs in the windows. Everything associated with that meeting had vanished as thoroughly as the drivers in the distortion. I was alone now, the last member of our investigation network who wasn't missing or scared into silence. And I had a choice to make. I could stay away from Route 127, avoid the stretched zone, and live with the knowledge that Dale and Ellen and dozens of others were trapped there. Or I could go back, try to understand the phenomenon better, maybe find a way to help them. But I remembered Opal's warning about drivers who stopped moving. And I remembered Ellen's frozen face, staring ahead without seeing, caught in an endless moment. Going back might mean joining them in that limbo, never reaching the end, never escaping, just driving the same miles forever while thinking I was making progress. I've made my decision, though I'm not sure it's the right one. I've accepted a load that will take me through Route 127 tonight, deliberately, with full knowledge of what I might encounter. I'm bringing equipment, supplies, documentation, and I'm bringing this written account, which I'll mail to a colleague before I enter the zone. If I don't reach Las Vegas by morning, if my truck is found empty at some mile marker along 127, at least someone will know what happened. At least the pattern will be documented. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Document the strangeness, bear witness to the impossible, and keep driving even when the road refuses to let us reach the end. I'm at mile marker 95 now, 10 miles from where the distortion begins. My GPS shows 156 miles to Las Vegas. My clocks show 11:47 p.m. In 13 miles, those numbers will stop making sense. I'll enter a section of highway where distance and time have become meaningless, where dozens of drivers sit frozen in their cabs, still trying to complete routes they'll never finish. And somewhere in that distortion, Dale is trapped. Ellen is trapped. All of them are waiting, caught in loops they don't understand and can't escape. I don't know if I can help them. I don't even know if I'll make it out myself. But I'm going in anyway, because someone has to. Because leaving them there without trying feels like a worse choice than risking joining them. Mile marker 103. The boundary is close now. I can feel it ahead, that subtle pressure in the air that signals where normal space ends and the stretched zone begins. My CB radio is crackling with static. In the static, I think I can hear voices. Ellen's voice repeating her position. Dale's voice calling for help. Others I don't recognize, all of them broadcasting from different points in the distortion. All of them still trying to reach the end of a road that has no end. Mile marker 108. The pressure shifts. My GPS stops changing. I'm in the loop now, and I don't know if I'll ever get out. But I keep driving, because that's all any of us can do. Keep moving forward, even when forward has stopped being a meaningful direction. The mile markers continue. 109, 110, 111. My GPS still shows 156 miles to Las Vegas. It will always show 156 miles. And somewhere ahead, in some fold of time I can't perceive, Dale and Ellen are still driving too, still thinking they're making progress, still believing they'll reach their destinations. We're all trapped in the same loop, separated by temporal folds that keep us from seeing each other even as we drive the same highway. Mile marker 127. I've been driving for what feels like an hour, but my clock has moved only 7 minutes. Mile marker 142. My clock has started running backward. Mile marker 156. I just passed my own truck going in the opposite direction. I saw myself in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead, not seeing anything. Mile marker 176. Ellen's truck is here, and she's still frozen in her cab. I stopped to check on her, knowing it violates Opal's warning but unable to just drive past. Her eyes move slightly when I knock on the window. Just barely, but enough to confirm she's still conscious in there somehow. Still experiencing time, just at a rate so different from mine that communication is impossible. I write a message on paper and press it to her window. We're trying to help, don't give up. I don't know if she can read it. I don't know if the message will mean anything to her when a second of my time is an hour or a day of hers. But I leave it there and return to my truck. I have to keep moving, have to find the edge of this distortion, the boundary where it resolves back to normal space, if such a boundary still exists. Mile marker 203. This is where I emerged last time, where the GPS started working again. But my GPS still shows 156 miles. My clock still shows impossible times. The boundary has moved, or I'm deeper in the distortion than before. Or there is no boundary anymore, and the stretched zone has become permanent. I keep driving, because stopping means becoming frozen like Ellen and Dale and all the others. Mile marker 247. I don't remember this section of Route 127 extending this far. Mile marker 289. The highway is still here, still marked, still paved. Mile marker 334. I've been driving for what feels like days, but my fuel gauge hasn't moved. My cargo temperature hasn't changed. Nothing ages or depletes in here because time has stopped having meaning. The CB radio crackles with voices, more of them now. Some I recognize, most I don't. All of them calling positions, asking for help, reporting that their GPS won't decrease. All of us trapped in the same loop, driving forever through a highway that has no end. I think about Opal, anchored to her station, unable to leave. Was she once a driver like us? Did she stop too long in the stretched zone and become permanently fixed to that location? Is that what awaits all of us eventually? Not escape, not death, but transformation into permanent features of the distortion. Frozen waypoints that future drivers will pass without understanding. Mile marker 401. The sun hasn't risen yet, even though I've been driving all night. Or maybe it has risen and set multiple times, and I just can't perceive it from inside the temporal fold. My phone shows messages from weeks ago, months ago, years ago, all arriving simultaneously, all marked with impossible timestamps. One of them is from Dale, sent after he disappeared. I found something at mile marker 489. A way out, maybe. Keep driving. Don't stop. Mile marker 489 is ahead. If I can reach it, if it even exists. I keep driving. The mile markers continue, counting up into numbers that shouldn't exist on Route 127. The highway stretches ahead, empty and dark, disappearing into distance that has stopped meaning anything. And behind me, in my mirrors, I can see headlights. Other trucks, other drivers, all of us caught in the same endless route. Some of them have been here for years, driving the same miles over and over, never reaching their destinations. Maybe I'll find Dale's exit at mile marker 489. Maybe I'll escape back to normal space-time and be able to report what I've seen, get help for the trapped drivers. Or maybe I'll just keep driving forever, adding my voice to the CB radio static, another position report that nobody will answer. The road goes on. The GPS still shows 156 miles to Las Vegas. I've covered thousands of miles that don't exist, and I'll cover thousands more because stopping means becoming frozen in time.